The next day, after visiting the gravesite, flower courtesans usually don't fancy martial men. Zhang Lu's Hong, having spent the night with a young courtesan, was fully satisfied. He now felt like treating Su Qian like a son. No wonder they say you're a courtesan killer. You're quite something. Su Qian looked bewildered. What? Zhang Lu's Hong chuckled. The story of 9 women for 1 man has spread throughout the capital. Su Qian thought to himself, what the hell? I was framed. Oh well, courtesan killer is better than Su the Crude. At this moment, Song Tingfeng jokingly asked, how did you sleep last night? Li Yuchen replied with a slight wave of his hand. Not bad, though it was a bit noisy. In Fu Xiang's room, a maid said, Lady Mingyan sent a message. She invites you to Qingxi Court for drinks at noon. Fu Xiang frowned. No one offers kindness without a reason. There's always an ulterior motive. Still, he decided to attend. After all, it wouldn't be wise to fall out with Lady Mingyan. One courtesan said, I heard that Master Su composed a poem in the palace, harshly criticizing the Minister of Justice, Sunday. Have you ladies heard about it? The courtesans immediately perked up. Master Su composed another poem? Not only is Master Su incredibly talented, but he's also very daring. He confronted the Minister of Justice head-on in the palace, completely humiliating him. It wasn't just humiliation. This poem has practically ruined Sun's reputation. Sun's reputation took a devastating hit. As the conversation reached its peak, the focus shifted entirely to Su Qian. Fu Xiang, dear sister, how did Master Su perform last night? Fu Xiang frowned slightly. So, the whole point of inviting me here was to gossip about this? How can I even talk about that? If I tell them the truth, they'll spread rumors about me being a vulgar woman. Just then, a leaf gently floated down in front of her. Fu Xiang had an idea. She used her chopsticks to place a fish bone on the leaf. She repeated this until there were 7 bones in total. Fu Xiang smiled gracefully. The surrounding courtesans looked at her with envy. Cut to another scene. After returning home, Su Qian immediately picked up a pen and paper to write in his diary. December 29th. It's been a long time since I wrote in my diary. I've burned my previous journals. After all, I'm not exactly a proper person. Today, I respectfully addressed His Majesty. I can't leave any incriminating evidence behind, even though I'll probably burn this in a few days. His Majesty pardoned me from the death sentence. I heard that the Minister of Rights committed suicide in the Justice Department's dungeon. It's the ending everyone wanted. However, the king's faction was decent enough to secure exile for his entire family instead of execution. No mass extermination, no extreme measures. I asked Wei Yuan why he didn't strike when they were down. His response was, a true gentleman doesn't destroy others completely. You're already done for. Why still pretend to be a gentleman? Su Qian sighed. Still, Wei Yuan isn't a bad person. December 30th. I visited Erlang at the academy today. He talked about a lot of things. I extracted the main points. Those damn instructors. Today it's essay tests. Tomorrow it's poetry. The day after, it's classics. If it's not me being tested, it's someone else. What the hell are we constantly being tested for? Seems the academic pressure is even Erlang is starting to crack. It feels like he's in the same state I was during the second half of my senior year. Can't think about that. That period is a dark shadow in my life. Endless exams. What the hell was all that for? December 31st. Fu Xiang seems to be getting more gentle and considerate with me. Is this what they call love born from time spent together? No. I need to ignore her for a few days. I'll change things up with another courtesan tomorrow. January 1st. Mingyan was amazing. A martial artist's flexibility really is something else. There's no position you can imagine that she can't do. Totally irresistible. January 2nd. I started writing a novel today because I promised Ling Yu I have to write an interesting script for him. I remember the beginning went like this. Once upon a time, there were childhood friends who had turned gray early. January 3rd. Today, I accompanied Biao Biao on a boat ride. This princess is a bit spoiled, willful, and temperamental, but she's easily persuaded. She has no scheming mind. She trusts me deeply. I successfully tricked her. Got a valuable painting worth 20 taels of gold. I gifted it to a certain elder. January 4th. Today, I chatted with Princess Hua Qing. We talked about a criminal case affecting the court's power dynamics. Afterward, he invited me to despise him. Turns out he's a peak perfectionist. It seems I've discovered something. As everyone knows, perfectionism can't be innate. It's the same for both men and women. But this isn't about Princess Hua Qing. It's about being a virgin. A proper princess is, of course, still a virgin. What I mean is, with her talent, she shouldn't be stuck at this level. Perhaps it's intentional. To avoid marriage, I saw the ambition in this princess. If she were in my era, she'd definitely be a dominant CEO. January 5th. I heard yesterday I met the eldest princess, Biao. Princess Biao looked furious, like she'd been betrayed by her boyfriend. She cursed me as an ungrateful dog servant. Just recently, she had rewarded me with a painting. I said the eldest princess gave me 200 silver coins. Hearing that, she raised the price. What a shrewd woman. I didn't take advantage of her. I made her a shuttle. They don't have this in the palace. Biao Biao had so much fun with it. She dragged me to play with her until dusk. What an empty day it was. January 6th, snow day. Ling Ying and Chu Kaiwei went to the Guiyu Tower for dinner. Those two scary women ate up my entire meal allowance. I feel cheated. After spending some time with them, I realized something quite troubling. Chu Kaiwei is 18 this year, but she seems to have no romantic inclinations. She's pretty dense when it comes to feelings. When I flirt with her, she blushes, but quickly forgets about it. Either I'm not handsome enough, or she just hasn't come around yet. I think it's the latter. After all, I haven't met anyone more handsome than me. Nangong, Shinro, and Erlang are beautiful, not handsome. I still need to keep trying. From past experience, I know that if I had gotten Chu Kaiwei into bed earlier, there wouldn't have been so many troublesome things. The same goes for seducing a princess, but the consequences are too severe. Princess watching is out of my league. It's quite challenging. Biao Biao might be worth a shot, but the ending would probably be a family execution. January 7th. Monk Heng Yuan came looking for me today. He asked to borrow money. I do enjoy people saying, "If you have troubles, come find me." He promised he'd pay me back. What nonsense. How could a stinking monk living in a temple have money to pay me back? Forget it. I'll consider it charity. By the way, the court situation has become increasingly unpredictable lately. Factions are fighting fiercely. Perhaps His Majesty is pleased to see it unfold this way. January 8th. Su Qian. That's Su Qian. You're about to reach the peak of practicing internal energy. With such talent, you shouldn't be distracted by women. Focus on training. Swear on it. From today onward, I won't accompany the two princesses. I won't accompany Chu Kaiwei. I won't accompany Su Lingyue, and I won't call on any courtesans at Fangxi Pavilion. If I do, may this serve as my oath. January 9th. I went to the Golan tea house again. That morning, Su Qian was summoned to the Divine Spear Hall by Yang Yin. Yang Yin got straight to the point. Bai Shu is considering promoting you to Silver Luo. Su Qian was stunned. For the public's sake, he must take on the role of Silver Luo, which prompted dreams of promotions, raises, and reaching the pinnacle of life, marrying a beautiful, wealthy wife. A silver gong's monthly salary is 10 taels of silver, not to mention some hidden income. Also, the silver gong wields considerable power. Not only can they command copper gongs directly, but their position is also secure. Even a gold gong cannot easily dismiss a silver gong. Finally, the silver gong is responsible, which also means Su Qian will have free access to the Imperial City, making it more convenient to visit Huiqing and Linen. This will help him develop relationships with the princesses, embracing their jade-like legs. Yang Yin continued, stating that after the Imperial review, the watchman will also undergo evaluation. This is personally supervised by the foster father. Promotions and demotions among the watchmen occur during this period. I just wanted to let you know in advance. Su Qian went home after finishing his duties. After dinner, he coughed and announced, "I have something to declare. After the Imperial review, I'll be a silver gong." Of course, that's not the main point. The main point is, I plan to buy a house in the inner city. His aunt and Su Lingyue lit up, their faces shining with joy. After all, moving to the inner city would improve security. Incidents of women being abducted in broad daylight were much rarer. Additionally, the shops in the inner city were far superior. Everything from clothing to food was a cut above. Uncle Su patted as if the child he'd raised had finally grown up. That night, lying in bed, Su Qian let his mind wander. I can get promoted and earn a raise, not just because of my contributions to the Sangbo case and the Yang Junju case, but also because I know how to curry favor. The painting Biao Biao gave me, Wei Yuan really liked it. Seeing how I'd made it back, he'll definitely nurture me. So, even with exceptional ability, having a good mentor, and knowing how to navigate social dynamics is crucial. Tomorrow, I'll go to the brokerage and make a list of houses for sale, then pick one by one. I still have over 7,400 taels in savings, so buying a 3-entry courtyard shouldn't be difficult. As he thought about it, he drifted into a deep sleep. Early the next morning, Su Qian rode his beloved mare, and quickly arrived at the Astronomical Bureau. "Miss Kaiwei, I'd like to buy a house in the inner city. I know the Astronomical Bureau can read feng shui, so I'd like to ask for your help." Kaiwei groaned. "I need to study alchemy." Song Qing interjected. "I'll call a junior brother to accompany you." Su Qian inwardly grumbled. Why would I need a junior brother? That's useless. Only having a junior sister with me makes this meaningful. Who wants to stroll around with a big guy? Su Qian politely declined Song Qing's offer. "Miss Kaiwei, why are you?" Kaiwei replied, "I've been stuck at the 7th grade feng shui master level for over a year. I could have advanced to alchemy long ago, but alchemy is so difficult, so tiring and boring." Su Qian nodded in understanding. After all, science and engineering are a woman's nightmare. Kaiwei continued, "Also, to advance to 6th grade alchemist, I have to independently develop a brand new alchemical product and make it widely known. I need positive feedback from the public. Only then can I successfully advance." Su Qian didn't quite grasp the part about public feedback. He didn't fully understand what Kaiwei meant. But he didn't ask for clarification. Instead, he asked another question. Do you know who created gunpowder? Su Qian scratched his head. How would I know? Song Qing explained. Gunpowder was invented 300 years ago by a feng shui master from the Astronomical Bureau. After he popularized gunpowder and earned public approval, he was promoted to alchemist. Kaiwei added, of course, it's not necessary to create something as shocking as gunpowder. Senior brother Song Qing became an alchemist by developing glazed glass. The key is public feedback. Su Qian cursed inwardly. So it was Song Qing who ruined my money-making plans. You bastard. He then asked, why do you need public feedback? Kaiwei immediately glanced at Song Qing. Song Qing sighed. This is a secret of the Astronomical Bureau. It's okay to tell you, but don't spread it around. What do you think sets the Astronomical Bureau apart from other systems of cultivation? Su Qian answered seriously. Serving the country and its people. Selfless dedication. Very noble. His response caused the surrounding white-robed sorcerers to pause, standing in place, savoring Su Qian's words. Song Qing nodded approvingly. You have a very keen and accurate perspective. I'm quite impressed by that. In all the cultivation systems, the 9th grade is the foundation. Actually, the characteristics of the 9th grade reflect each system's core. For warriors, it's refining strength. For scholars, it's enlightened insights. For monks, it's the novice rank. For warriors, the essence of refining strength is the body. The body is a warrior's foundation. For scholars, it's the enlightened insights. It doesn't mean that if you're not bright, you shouldn't read books. For monks, the novice rank means that novices must uphold. This is the foundation for monks. Su Qian asked curiously, then how does the 9th grade healer fit into the sorcerer system? Being a doctor doesn't seem to have much to do with being a sorcerer. Song Qing explained. The 9th grade healer isn't a coincidence. The sorcerer system follows the path of humanity. So, to become a 6th grade alchemist, you need the approval of the people. That's why the Astronomical Bureau must rely on the court. Su Qian suddenly seemed to understand. No wonder this group of white-robed individuals, despite their pride, still worked for the people. No wonder they have always been the protectors of the capital. It turns out they must rely on the court. It reminded him of the Confucians, who also depend on the court. The Confucians still don't have any 2nd grade experts. Judging from Erlang's words, it's likely that the attempt was blocked. It's like how a 7th grade feng shui master can't advance without public approval. If there's someone stuck there, there must be other paths. Aside from the obvious system differences, there's also an underlying division at play. Su Qian asked again, any leads on a completely new alchemical method? Song Qing sighed. My little junior sister isn't exactly bright, and she doesn't like studying. It'll be tough. The other white-robed sorcerers shook their heads, clearly not optimistic about Chu Caiwei's advancement. Kaiwei pouted, looking like a struggling student, facing her elders' disappointed sighs. Su Qian thought to himself that this world doesn't have mutual funds. Would creating a mutual fund count as developing a new alchemy? He pondered for a moment, before saying, I might have a way. As soon as he spoke, it caused an uproar in the room. All the white-robed sorcerers turned to look at him. Su Qian was taken aback. What's with all of you? Why do you all look like you've finally resolved a long-standing concern? Like relieved parents? Su Qian let out an awkward laugh. Let me think about it a bit more, and I'll give you an answer in a few days. Miss Kaiwei, are you free today? Song Qing immediately pushed Chu Kaiwei to her feet. She is. Mr. Su is our Astronomical Bureau's valued guest. That's 100 times more important than alchemy. Today, you'll accompany him in the inner city. Before long, Su Qian brought Chu Kaiwei to Yahao. An old broker greeted them enthusiastically. Sir, madam, are you here to buy or sell property? Su Qian scoffed inwardly. So it's an old man. In my past life, it was always a beautiful, well-dressed career woman who greeted you. Su Qian found a seat in the hall. He plopped down on the chair, putting on the air of a nouveau riche. I'm here to buy property. The old broker's smile grew even more enthusiastic. What kind of size are you looking for? Su Qian replied nonchalantly. 3 courtyards. The smile on the old broker's face could no longer be described as just enthusiastic. Depending on the location in the inner city, ordinary small courtyards aside, 3 courtyard houses generally range from 5,000 to 10,000 taels. Furthermore, this year we haven't sold anything of this grade at the brokerage. Just making this sale would cover our expenses for a year. The old broker humbly asked, do you have a particular property in mind? Su Qian casually replied, something between 5,000 and 7,000 taels. Give me a list of what you have. In no time, several lists were drawn up. Su Qian glanced through them, then tossed aside anything he disliked, couldn't afford. Kaiwei asked curiously, why only this particular property? Su Qian raised an eyebrow, smiling. Because this one is close to the teaching offices. Why is this house so much cheaper, old man? The old broker looked around nervously, then lowered his voice. There's a reason for the low price. That house is haunted. If you're not experienced, I suggest you choose another one. Su Qian mulled it over. Haunted? As a night watchman, I suppose I have to check out just how haunted it is. He cautiously asked the old broker, "What exactly is going on?" The old broker explained hesitantly, "That house is haunted. It started about 2 years ago. That place originally belonged to a family. One night, they suddenly heard a woman crying in the courtyard. The sound was especially chilling. The servants brought lanterns to investigate. They saw a woman in white sitting by the well. Her face was covered. When the servant asked who she was, she didn't answer. She just kept crying. The servant thought it was some lady of the house who'd been wronged, so he brought the lantern closer to see." The old broker's voice grew more somber, as if he had personally witnessed the horror. Meanwhile, Chu Kaiwei balled her fists, both scared and curious, and asked, "What happened next?" The old broker's voice took on an eerie tone. The woman suddenly raised her face. Her features were a bloody mess. Her eyes dangled from her face like black holes. Bugs crawled in and out of them. Her lips were black and purple, and thick, dark blood oozed from her mouth. The first family moved out after that. The next 2 or 3 buyers experienced the same thing, and there were even stranger happenings. From then on, it was as if a string of bad luck followed. Problems kept piling up. Someone in the house would always have bad luck, getting hurt, or the family business would suddenly fail. Eventually, they had to move out. Su Qian asked, "Did they report it to the authorities?" The old broker sighed. "Of course they did, but since no one actually died, the authorities investigated a few times and then stopped. The earlier families did hire some masters. At first, things seemed to calm down, but it wasn't long before it started again. The ghostly wailing returned, making everyone in the house anxious. The bad luck never went away. Whoever was doomed stayed doomed." Su Qian said calmly, "This house is quite interesting. We'd like to see it." The old broker was startled. He thought, these two must be foolish. They're young and reckless, thinking they're special, immune to trouble. But the broker sighed and still carried out his duties. All right, I'll take you two to see it. We have plenty of houses to look at. This one is only 3 miles from the Fang's office. It's quite lively even during the day. Going to the clock tower is a good idea." The old broker unlocked the padlock on the gate. He pushed open the heavy door with some effort. "Come in, my lord and lady." My lord and lady was a very respectful form of address, much like being formally called sir and madam. Su Qian nodded and led Chu Kaiwei inside to look around. Compared to his second, this property's layout and structure were much brighter and more grand. The old broker suddenly said, "We'll stop here. You can't go further inside. It's very inauspicious." Su Qian muttered under his breath, "I find you annoying," then said calmly, "Wait outside for us. We'll come out shortly. I'll take my wife to look around." The old broker didn't argue further. After all, it's hard to convince people who refuse to listen. At this point, Chu Kaiwei exclaimed, "Who's your wife? Stop spouting nonsense." Su Qian grinned at her. "Isn't it just a matter of time?" Emperor Yuanjing pondered for a moment, then said, "The one who reported you is the official patrolman, Golden Gong Zhuyang." Wei Yuan remained silent. At that moment, a censor from the Ministry of Justice stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the patrolmen abused their power for personal gain. I suggest that Wei Yuan be held accountable, and that we rid ourselves of this corrupt atmosphere." Several ministers immediately. Emperor Yuanjing nodded and said, "This case will be handled by the Ministry of Justice and the Court of Judicial Review. We need results within 3 days." After the meeting ended, as Wei Yuan walked away, someone behind him called out, "Lord Wei, please wait. This official would like to ask Lord Wei about the list of beggars from the countryside." Wei Yuan nodded calmly and replied, "I'll have someone send the list to the Court of Judicial Review." The Court of Judicial Review chief was pleased. "Also, Lord Wei, this official sees great potential in Golden Gongzhu. I'd like to transfer him to the Court of Judicial Review. This official will report this to His Majesty later, but I wanted to inform Lord Wei first." The Court of Judicial Review chief saw that Wei Yuan remained unmoved, and after a brief silence, "Hee, Lord Wei, you know exactly what I want." Wei Yuan chuckled as well. "It's worth the trade." On the carriage, Nan Gong Qianro pouted and grumbled, "What a mistake! What a mistake! Foster father, you knew there might be issues, yet you still clung to old ties. And now, look what happened. You've lost far more than just some men. The watchman's yamen, other than people like Li Yuchen, who's as stubborn as a mule. There's only rigid warriors like Yang Yin, who aren't interested in beauty or wealth. And then there are the eccentrics like Nan Gong Qianro." Nan Gong Qianro said angrily, "Should we just kill him?" Wei Yuan calmly replied, "Settling scores can wait until after the harvest." Nan Gong Qianro, confused, asked, "Even though this isn't entirely that kid's fault, he still plays a part in it. Foster father, you could have avoided all this. Is that kid really worth all this effort?" Wei Yuan smiled and said, "There are many golden gongs, but only one as interesting as him. I'm looking forward to seeing him grow." Then, with a sudden change in tone, he said, "Our emperor, he'll never allow me to grow too powerful." Nan Gong Qianro asked, "Earlier, the chief of judicial review wanted to exchange that list for the secret message. Why did foster father refuse?" Wei Yuan knew that his final comment, it's worth the trade, was not agreeing to the chief's deal, but rather deciding to replace both the golden gong and silver gong to mitigate the damage. Nan Gong Chinro sighed. This really is a turbulent year. Every Imperial review causes an upheaval. It took so long to build this team, and now it'll be crippled again. There's always a winner after each review. The Wong faction rose in the last Imperial review, but one thing is unavoidable. After every review, all factions suffer heavy losses. Even the victors come out battered. At this point, Wei Yuan sighed and said, "Go find Su Qian and have him lie low for a few days. I'll figure out a way to get him out of this." As for the Moon Osmanthus Tower side, Su Qian spent an hour accompanying Chu Kaiwei shopping, buying whatever caught her eye. He couldn't help but think, shopping is even more tiring than fighting. It wasn't physical exhaustion, it was mental fatigue, but as long as she was happy, it was worth a little extra effort. He recalled a saying from his past life. There are 70 ways to please a woman. One is shopping, and the other 69. The latter was untested, but the shopping approach clearly worked. Just then, a sense of foreboding struck him. Without missing a beat, he took out his small mirror. Message from Mirror 1. Something's happened at the Watchman's Yamen. Golden Gong Zhu Yang has accused Wei Yuan of corruption. This case implicates 4 golden gongs, 12 silver gongs, and 30 copper gongs. It's being jointly handled by the Ministry of Justice, the Court of Judicial Review, and the local authorities. Does this mean Wei Yuan is falling out of favor? Could he be taken down during the Imperial Review? Su Qian was shocked. Zhu Yang had turned traitor. This report implicated so many people. Over recent weeks, factional struggles in the capital had raged fiercely, with each side gaining and losing ground. I thought the Watchmen, due to their unique position, could navigate these storms unscathed. Clearly, I underestimated the court's intrigue and the depth of factional strife. Zhu Yang, as a golden gong, must have had plenty of dirt on the Watchmen. Now he's turned against them. This could be catastrophic, and it's probably all because of me. I heard Zhu Gong ending his martial path. Meanwhile, not only was I unharmed, but I was promoted and got a raise. If I were Emperor Yuanjing, I wouldn't let Wei Yuan rise unchecked either. From the tax office case to the Songhua case, and through this recent struggle, the civil factions have been at each other's throats. The incensed cabinet remained intact, but that's only because the other side didn't have enough leverage. They didn't have the confidence to escalate. Father Wei once told me that currently in the court, the Wong faction and the Watchmen hold the most power. Now that the Wong faction has lost some ground, the faction represented by Wei Yuan is bound to act. Losing me, a mere copper gong, should be no big deal. It would be surprising if Zhu Yang let me off the hook. At this moment, Member 4 said, corruption is just a surface excuse. Speaking of corruption, with Wei Yuan overseeing the Watchmen, it's nothing compared to the court's shameless officials. Emperor Yuanjing is merely using this chance to put Wei Yuan in check. Su Qian considered this carefully. Member 4 really lives up to his reputation as a court veteran, analyzing from 1,000 miles away and hitting the mark. This is pretty much what I thought. But with Member 1's level, how could he not see through such a simple situation? Why would he ask such a naive question? Su Qian sent a message. If this is Emperor Yuanjing's order, then Wei Yuan is powerless, right? He'd have no choice but to abandon these subordinates. Member 4 replied, it depends on Yuanjing's and Wei Yuan's attitudes. If it's just corruption, the punishment won't be severe, but some will definitely be expelled from the Yamen. Suddenly, Su Qian began to worry. Twin returns, you say? Just then, Chu Kaiwei asked, what are you writing? And drawing on the mirror? Su Qian chuckled. It's nothing. After lunch, let's check out that haunted house. No matter what, let's buy it first. Having some real estate is more important than anything else. He handed the jade token to Chu Kaiwei. Can you hold on to this for me for a few days? After dark, the two returned to the haunted house. Su Qian asked, can you tell me now why we're coming here at night? Chu Kaiwei replied crisply, during the day, the yang energy is strong. The female ghost in the well won't appear. To get rid of her, she needs to be present. Also, I suspect there's something unusual in the well. I plan to go down and take a look. With that, they both jumped in. The water was freezing cold. They swam for about 10 minutes, and suddenly saw a white-clad woman at the bottom of the well. The woman seemed to sense something too. She slowly raised her head. It was a face mangled beyond recognition, with hollow eye sockets crawling with worms. Su Qian shuddered. Damn it. Looks like the old broker wasn't lying. This ghost really does look... The ghost, sensing a threat, let out a silent scream and lunged at them. Su Qian gripped his sword hilt. I don't know how to deal with vengeful spirits. Guess I'll just cut her down. At that moment, Chu Caiwei's feng shui compass suddenly lit up with golden light. The light enveloped the ghost, drawing her into the compass. Chu Kaiwei quickly retrieved the compass, then surfaced. Su Qian pushed himself out of the well and climbed up, turning back to say, grab onto my leg. I'll pull you up. After climbing out of the well, Chu Kaiwei said, this was just a regular vengeful spirit. Su Qian frowned. A regular vengeful spirit? How did it last so long then? Chu Kaiwei explained. The bottom of the well connects to an underground stream. The well's resentment comes from there. I suspect. Su Qian nodded in realization. So that's why purification didn't work. That's why the previous master's rituals failed. And besides, they weren't sorcerers. Chu Kaiwei nodded firmly. This place is no good. The Yin vein is underground. The feng shui here is terrible. Living here for long will bring bad luck. Su Qian laughed. Why not buy it? This house is dirt cheap. Did you think I called you here just to look around? You've got to fix the feng shui for me. Chu Kaiwei pouted. I'm already exhausted from studying. She sulked, then leapt back up onto the roof. From above, she shouted down. Send me to heaven. Su Qian cupped his hands together to form a step. Chu Kaiwei leaped up, her toes pressing into his palms. Using his strength and her own, her light frame shot upwards like a sword into the night sky. Her green glow eyes opened, surveying the entire property. This area's feng shui isn't bad, she remarked. There shouldn't be such lingering Yin energy. Su Qian couldn't resist a sarcastic thought. Maybe your skills aren't up to par. He asked. How about you take another look? Or maybe go back to the Tianjian and ask your seniors? Chu Kaiwei landed lightly and waved her hand dismissively. No need for all that. Let's just communicate with the ghost directly, empathize with it, and find out how it died. But the ghost's Yin energy is too heavy. Empathizing with it means absorbing that Yin energy, which isn't good for a woman's body. That's why I need you. Your robust blood and qi will prevent any side effects. With that, she removed her feng shui compass and made a subtle gesture. A wisp of faint black mist emerged. With a flick of her finger, Chu Kaiwei directed it towards Su Qian. The mist darted into his forehead. Su Qian felt a sudden chill, as an intense wave of hatred, madness, and fear flooded into him. The ghost's thoughts assaulted his spirit, trying to seize control of his body. Then, the ghost abruptly quieted down. It seemed to grow wary, perhaps sensing the presence of the monk's divine scripture, though the monk remained dormant. Otherwise, he might have obliterated the ghost. The two began to empathize. Suddenly, unfamiliar scenes appeared, like watching a movie. I was the daughter of a farming family in Taikang County. Because of my beauty, many suitors came to our door. According to the normal path of life, I would have married into a good family and lived a peaceful life. But one fateful outing changed everything. In a quiet alley, human traffickers abducted me by force. When I woke up, I found myself in a large mansion in the capital. The mansion housed many women like me, and we all had the same role. Every night, we accompanied the guests who came and went, serving their whims. They addressed each other as Lord, clearly officials of some rank. These so-called lords in their official robes were worse than beasts, indulging themselves with the women of the house. I served many of these men, and though my heart was filled with pain and hatred, the fear forced me to endure in silence. For several years, I suffered in this way. One day, a guest named Tamraha took an interest in me and made me his exclusive companion. My situation began to improve slightly, but one day, I overheard Tamraha speaking with a high-ranking official about matters such as Yunjo, artillery, and machinery. After that, they silenced me permanently. There was a well in the mansion's backyard, used to dispose of the women who either took their own lives or were killed by guests. After I was murdered, I was thrown into that well. That's when I became a malevolent spirit, trapped in the well. By chance, I followed an underground current and ended up here. Sustained by the resentment, seeping from the underground stream. Only now has my soul avoided complete destruction. Chu Kaiwei saw Su Qian's face contort, sometimes in rage, sometimes in anguish. What kind of experiences could have led to so much negative emotion? She hurriedly resealed the ghost in her feng shui compass. Su Qian opened his eyes and let out a heavy breath. Empathizing with spirits is no easy task. Thankfully, I've been meditating on my primordial spirit daily. If it were an ordinary person, they'd probably end up depressed or even mentally unstable. Still, I have to say, there were quite a few familiar faces in those visions. Especially that high-ranking official speaking with Tamraha. That high-ranking official, as well as that Tamraha guy. Judging by his appearance, he's not from the Central Plains. He seems more like someone from an area under the Wushan sect. But how is the Wushan sect connected to Yunjo? Yunjo is in the southeast of Dafeng. Though it was just a few words, it seems like someone has been secretly providing advanced equipment from the Wushan sect or Yunjo. Su Qian briefly summarized the matter to Chu Kaiwei. This involves treason and collaboration with the enemy. I have to report it to Wei Yuan. Chu Kaiwei, still puzzled, said, she suffered so much in life. After death, her resentment lingered, becoming a malevolent spirit. But if that place accumulated so much resentment, it should have been discovered long ago. Su Qian smiled. We'll discuss this later. By the way, give me back the mirror. He was now set to accomplish something significant. He no longer feared allegations of corruption, nor did he need to leave the mirror in Chu Tsaiwei's care. Besides, that mirror held over 900 taels of gold. Su Qian brought Chu Kaiwei with him and headed to the night patrol office. Along the way, they encountered 4 patrolling constables, who stopped them for questioning. Su Qian displayed his badge. "It's me." The constables didn't dare show any disrespect. "Sir Su, why are you still wandering outside?" Today, officials from the prefecture and the Ministry of Justice raided the night patrol office. They took many colleagues away. They say your name was on the list too. Fortunately, you weren't at the office and escaped arrest. Is your home still safe? Su Qian asked. Who did they take? Upon asking, he found out that among the 4 Jinluo captains taken, one was Jiang Luzhong. The Yinluo officers included Li Yuchen, Min Shan, and Yang Feng. All 3 were his trusted subordinates from the Songhua case. Jiang Luzhong was known to be upright. Even if he was corrupt, it was minor. How did he get taken? Was it because of his association with me, targeted by that bastard Zhu? Poor brother Chun. What a disaster. Sure enough, that bastard Zhu targeted me intentionally. He went after those closest to me. He weakened the patrol unit and got his revenge. 2 constables fumed helplessly. Wei Gong will surely save them. These bastards in official robes really think we're pushovers. I heard it was the emperor himself who ordered the investigation. That might make things difficult for Wei Gong. What should we do? The atmosphere in the office was particularly tense and quiet that day. Su Qian reassured them. We'll find a way. The 2 constables shook their heads, deeply pessimistic. They sighed and resumed their patrol. Su Qian made his way back to the office. He headed straight for Haoqi Tower. At the base of the tower, guards stopped him. Wei Gong is resting. No visitors are allowed. It's the rule. Su Qian said firmly. I have urgent matters. Send word immediately. The guards held their ground. Sir, please return tomorrow. Su Qian's patience ran out. He stepped forward and slapped the guard. Still unsatisfied, he delivered several more heavy blows. I'll ask again. Will you send word? The other guards groaned in frustration. Sir, you're putting us in a difficult position. If Wei Gong blames us later. Su Qian reached into his purse and pulled out a silver tael. This simple silver coin. Isn't it worth the risk? Or should I find someone else? The guards immediately nodded. Understood, sir. About 10 minutes later, Wei Yuan appeared in his green robe, calmly instructing Su Qian to tend to chores. Light the coals, boil water, and light the other candles. Su Qian quickly complied. It seemed Wei Gong was somewhat afraid of the dark. Despite his cunning mind, he appeared to have no martial talents. Su Qian thought to himself, fate is truly fair. Soon, the candles lit up the spacious tea room. The charcoal fire was placed beside Wei Yuan. Wei Yuan said indifferently, Today, I asked Qianro to notify you to hide. After searching the whole office, we still couldn't find you. We inquired at the Su residence and learned you weren't there. Asked Jia Fengxi, and now you come to me so late. It's not about the embezzlement case, is it? Wei Yuan glanced at Chu Kaiwei. This young patrolman is Miss Caiwei's sweetheart? Chu Caiwei's face flushed. He's not. He's just clueless. Her blush faded quickly. At this point, Su Qian quickly changed the subject. Wei Gong, I uncovered a major case. I took leave today to buy a house. I found a haunted abandoned house. After Miss Kaiwei dealt with the matter, she connected with the ghost. Su Qian explained in detail the process of connecting. Wei Yuan stared at Su Qian. So, the 7 sects really have ties to the Yunjo bandits. This information is crucial. Su Qian thought to himself, maybe you should adopt me. I've never wanted to work hard anyway. But as someone who values face, he couldn't bring himself to say such things. Su Qian said ashamedly, Wei Gong, Zhu Yang betrayed us all because of me. Wei Yuan replied, it would have happened even without him. This time, it's the faction targeting us. Of course, there are other parties fueling the fire in secret. Su Qian was startled. So the main force behind this embezzlement case is the faction. Even though I learned through the D-book, from number 1, that Zhu Yang betrayed us as a turncoat, number 1 never mentioned that the faction was behind it. I thought it was the royalist faction causing trouble, but this is too coincidental. Today the office is hit by an embezzlement case. I'm implicated. Then this major discovery happens immediately. Is it because causing my luck to change dramatically? Otherwise, it doesn't add up. Chu Kaiwei quipped. This is so amusing. Royalists colluding with demons. The faction colluding with the Wushan cult. What kind of people are in the court? Has His Majesty gone crazy from practicing Taoism? Su Qian quickly elbowed the outspoken girl. The girl who spoke without restraint. Are all the sorcerers under the 4 heavenly swords like this? Wei Yuan smiled gently. Although His Majesty neglects state affairs, he still holds supreme power. But inevitably, some demons and monsters are nurtured. He excels in manipulation, and the officials are not foolish either. But His Majesty is always lenient toward those who have great value, lack power. Yang Qianhuan, who acts bizarrely in court, is tolerated by His Majesty, and His Majesty never gets angry. Su Qian chuckled. The Confucian dragon-slaying technique? Isn't it meant to slay this very dragon? As soon as Su Qian said this, he was elbowed in playful retaliation. Su Qian, with distant thoughts, manipulated the court from afar. The officials in court played along. When an emperor focuses solely on his power, neglecting both design and reputation, the criteria for selecting officials will change. The evaluation standards will lean toward obedience and ease of control. Character and capability become less important, unless one is as exceptionally brilliant as Wei Yuan. Thinking of this, Su Qian sighed. Wei Gong, is this why you eliminate obstacles? At this moment, Wei Yuan took out a document, signed it, and stamped it with the official seal. Wei Yuan handed it to Su Qian, saying, take this document to Jin Luo Zhang Kaidai on duty. Have him organize the... Over at the Divine Sword Hall, Zhang Kaidai read the document. He laughed heartily and said good 3 times. This time, the 7 parties won't be able to get away with it. He then looked at Su Qian. This time, the help from our colleagues is thanks to you. Zhang Kaidai had a favorable impression of Su Qian. This seemingly ordinary small gong official always managed to surprise people. He solved the Sangbo case and uncovered the 7 parties' collusion with the Wu Shen sect. He is indeed a talent worth nurturing. 15 minutes later, Zhang Kaidai led his men. They reached the target mansion within half an hour. A silver rank officer broke down the gate, and the night patrol rushed inside. The entire mansion was immediately thrown into chaos. But as time passed, the sounds of shouting and fighting faded into the quiet night. Su Qian, gripping his blade, charged into the inner courtyard. Using his memory as a guide, he kicked open a door in the inner courtyard. Inside the warm front hall, he found a gathering of over a dozen guests and women. Their clothes were disheveled, and they looked terrified. Su Qian swung his black gold longsword and announced, Night Patrol inspection. Everyone, kneel with your hands on your head. Any resistance will be punished by death. After shouting this, he left, while several bronze rank officers began kicking open doors. They rounded up all the patrons in the courtyard. At that moment, a silver rank officer sneered while speaking with familiar officials. Lord Chao, it's you? Oh, Lord Wang is here too? Lord Tang, always short but spirited. In the warm inner hall, the night patrol officers looked extremely uncomfortable. They discovered that even children had been caught, which infuriated them. The authorities strongly opposed such behavior, but it was still common among many corrupt officials and nobles. Many brothels would secretly raise children for this purpose, serving clients with such preferences. They were forced to accompany them in bed. Back in the front hall, Zhang Kaidai interrogated, who was the mastermind behind this? The mansion's owner knelt and stammered, I am just a small man. I only wanted to make connections with powerful officials. I have no backer. At this point, Su Qian said, there's a well in the backyard, used specifically to dispose of women. Zhang Kaidai gave the middle-aged man a deep look. I saw everything. Don't even think about killing yourself. Once you enter the patrol's dungeon, we'll get the truth out of you, even if we have to pry it from your mouth. Soon, Su Qian led Zhang Kaidai to the backyard, where they found the well. The well water had turned black. A faint stench of decay wafted up. After flesh decays, the bones sink. Someone noted, we'll probably need to go down the well to retrieve them. At this moment, Chu Kaiwei leapt onto the roof and surveyed the backyard. A moment later, she said, there's a wind-restricting formation in the courtyard. The resentment in the well has been sealed off. Su Qian blinked. A sealing formation? Is that why, after all these years, the night patrol never discovered anything? Su Qian asked, wait a second, isn't setting up formations something sorcerers handle? As he asked, another question rose in his mind. If they had the ability to seal off the resentment, why didn't they just destroy it completely? After all, even someone of Chu Caiwei's rank can handle that. Setting up a strong, pure yang-based feng shui array would have eliminated future problems. Chu Kaiwei pouted. There are always some freeloaders. Behind the massive tax fraud case, wasn't there an alchemist stirring things up? At that moment, Zhang Kaidai stared at the well and said, there are carvings on the well walls. They look like Wu Shen sect techniques. It seems to be some kind of pattern, but its exact purpose is unclear. Take a rubbing of it for later analysis, Zhang ordered. Su Qian spoke up. According to the information I empathized from the vengeful spirits, this place is indeed connected to the Wu Shen sect. As he finished, he mentally complained, damn it, I was dominated by that guy named Tamraha, over and over again. Next time I see him, I'll make sure he knows what exhaustion feels like. Just then, the sound of commotion and screams came from the front hall. Zhang Kaidai rushed back to the front hall. Su Qian and another officer quickly followed. When they arrived, they saw Zhang Kaidai decisively slicing the last paper figure into 2 pieces. Su Qian was shocked. What happened? The silver rank officer guarding the prisoners replied, these 2 suddenly had paper figures emerge from their bodies, trying to silence witnesses, but we stopped them. Zhang Kaidai asked, what about the human traffickers? The silver rank officer said, it's all under control. As he finished, a bronze rank officer kicked the middle-aged man. Unexpectedly, the man collapsed to the ground, completely limp. Everyone's expressions changed drastically. The silver rank officer guarding him rushed forward. After checking his breathing and pulse, his face turned grim. I failed to protect him. Please punish me, my lord. Zhang Kaidai was silent for a few seconds, then exhaled slowly. It's not your fault. He walked over to the corpse, grabbed the man's foot, and gave it a slight shake. There was a snapping sound, and the clothes tore apart. The middle-aged man's bare body was exposed to everyone. A fresh red mark. Zhang Kaidai said, "This is a witch's death curse. Using blood ties, hair, blood, and other personal items combined with a birth chart, one can kill invisibly." Su Qian felt a chill down his spine. This kind of killing method is impossible to defend against, especially for martial artists who only rely on brute strength. After thinking for a moment, Su Qian asked, "What about the paper figures?" Zhang Kaidai pondered for a while. "These paper figures make me think of something. The Wu Shun sect's methods are mysterious and unpredictable. They have death curses, killing in dreams, and the ability to control ghosts and corpses. These paper figures are possessed by ghosts, used by the sorcerer to carry out tasks." Su Qian nodded. "The well in the backyard. It's specifically used by Wu Shan sect sorcerers to nurture ghosts. That explains why it was sealed, rather than completely purified. The sorcerer is likely nearby." Zhang Kaidai sighed. Our surprise raid caught him off guard, so he stayed hidden and used the curse to silence witnesses. Now that the man is dead, he won't stay around any longer. Su Qian asked, "Zhang Jinluo, you didn't sense the paper figures? You didn't detect them earlier? They were hidden on these young men?" Zhang Kaidai explained, "For martial artists, we can only detect threats that directly endanger us. Martial artists can only detect immediate threats. Secondly, the paper figures are both vessels for ghosts, and a layer of sealing magic, which can block perception. Thirdly, the paper figures aren't meant to be deadly, usually serving other tasks rather than killing." Suddenly, Su Qian exploded in anger, cursing useless trash. He drew his black gold long sword, sending a surge of spiritual energy that cut through the hall's beam. In a shadowed area on the rooftop, a hidden figure sneered coldly before vanishing into the darkness. At the residence of the Minister of Public Works, the minister was sound asleep, holding his concubine. A paper figure floated in on the night breeze, gently landing in the room. A few seconds later, the paper figure drifting onto the minister's forehead. In the next instant, it forcefully headbutted him in the face. The minister woke up instantly. He pulled the object off his face. Upon seeing it was a paper figure, his expression became serious. He quickly checked his concubine, confirming she was still sound asleep. Only then did he unfold the paper figure and squint to read the tiny characters on it. But after reading for a short while, his expression suddenly changed drastically. He read through the entire message, then exhaled a deep breath of relief. He calmed down and seemed more relaxed. After a moment of contemplation, he slowly picked up a pillow and placed it over his concubine's mouth and nose. The concubine woke up, struggling to breathe, but her life ended abruptly in that moment. The next day, at the Ministry of Justice, a corruption case involving the night patrol and 46 officers, including bronze ranks, resulted in all of them being detained. According to protocol, cases should be divided among 3 different courts. Some should be tried separately. However, in the tax fraud and Sangbo cases, the faction opposing Wei Yuan had lost 2 core members. They were now at odds with him. The Ministry of Justice seized the opportunity, showing more eagerness than the 7-party faction. The Minister of Justice, Chen Shang, commented, "People are watching from above. You think that by relying on promises, you can escape the law? I have already investigated your assets, and I've submitted the report. Once His Majesty returns from mourning, none of you will escape. Of course, I am still willing to give you a chance. Who ordered you to embezzle and oppress the common people? Was it Wei Yuan?" Li Yuchen sneered. "Embezzlement? Minister, please tell me how much silver I allegedly embezzled. I've worked for the Night Patrol for over a decade, and I haven't taken even a single coin." The Minister of Justice snorted coldly, still trying to argue, but as he spoke, he froze. His gaze wasn't on Li Yuchen, but on the unexpectedly clean prison cell. The cobwebs in the corners were gone, though the straw mat was still worn, was neatly laid out on the bed. Every detail was orderly and spotless. The Minister of Justice was deeply moved. How can this cell be so tidy? Looking at the cell, he felt an inexplicable sense of comfort. Turning around, he asked, "What is this man's name? How much silver did he take? How many houses does he own in the capital?" An official replied, "His name is Li Yuchen. He owns a modest courtyard in the inner city. At home, he has an elderly mother and a pregnant wife. As for his wealth, the Ministry of Justice found only 50 taels of silver in his house." The minister was shocked. Only 50 taels of silver? A silver rank officer, and he only has 50 taels to his name? He felt that the investigation was handled carelessly by his subordinates. Angrily, he demanded, "How did you conduct this investigation?" The official whispered something in his ear. After listening, the minister fell silent. He snorted coldly and left. A gold rank officer then asked, "Old Jiang, what are your plans?" Jiang replied with a bitter smile, "What plans could I have? After all this, I'll have to find a new path. My wife and children are in the cap. I won't turn to crime." The gold rank officer said, "Well, I have no family. I could roam the martial world instead. Besides, I'm tired of staying in the capital. Zhang Luzhong sneered coldly. You were just saying a while ago that you wanted to get married and settle down in the capital. Now you're lamenting not having accumulated wealth over the years, only taking small, short-term gains. Otherwise, this prison stay wouldn't seem so unjust. Jin Luo said sarcastically, then go be an outlaw after you're released. Zhang Luzhong snorted angrily. They both knew deep down. The worst outcome would be losing their positions. At least their lives were not in danger. For high-ranking military officials, as long as no serious crime was committed, court usually wouldn't sentence them to death, because when those fierce warriors go berserk, their destructive power is not to be underestimated. The Minister of Justice, after leaving the prison, asked again, "Why haven't I seen that little bastard surnamed Su?" An official replied, "It seems he has escaped. The arrest warrant is ready. Once stamped by the offices, it will be issued." The minister asked again, "How much silver did that kid embezzle?" An official opened the case file and glanced at it. "Yesterday, we searched the Su residence. We only found a few hundred bolts of silk and silver. There wasn't much." The minister was puzzled. Where did the rest of the money go? Store the silk and goods for now. After this matter is resolved, distribute it to the officials in the department. The official hesitated, nervously replying, "We didn't dare confiscate those items." The minister's expression darkened, his sharp gaze piercing the official. The official quickly explained, "Those were gifts from His Majesty. Nobody dared to take them. If Su Pingji complains to the court later." The minister suddenly recalled recent events and decided to drop the matter. He then said, "I heard that bastard." The official nodded, "Yes. We sent someone to inquire at Jiafengxi. Over the past 2 months, he slept with 8 top courtesans there. He also has a romantic relationship with the courtesan in Imei Pavilion." The minister, slightly excited, remarked, "So that's it? Turns out he spent all the money on women." The testimonies of the Jiafengxi women can also be used as evidence. The official hesitated, troubled by the situation, but all the testimonies from those women were surprisingly consistent. The Minister of Justice gave the official a questioning look. The official replied in frustration, "Those women admired Su's talent. They served him willingly without accepting a single coin." The minister staggered slightly, nearly losing control in anger. He took a deep breath, then began cursing, "Bastard. If there are no flaws, then create some. If there's no money, then give him some. I won't let this little scoundrel off the hook." At that moment, a maid hurriedly entered and reported, "Minister, there's a message from the palace. His Majesty summons you." The minister's face twitched slightly. Why is His Majesty being so diligent, summoning his ministers every few days? Meanwhile, at the royal study, Wei Yuan and Wang Shoufu had arrived early. The minister furrowed his brow, wondering, what scheme is Wei Yuan up to now? In the distance, the emperor observed his loyal minister Wei Yuan. "Go ahead and speak," he commanded. Wei Yuan stepped forward and reported, "Last night, patrolmen discovered a hidden brothel in the inner city, disguised as a wealthy residence. The women there were originally from decent families, as were the young boys, children of ordinary households. They were kidnapped by human traffickers and imprisoned there, forced to serve customers who visited the house at night. Last night, the patrolmen launched a raid and eliminated the gang of criminals. 13 clients were arrested, including 3 government officials. One was seriously injured in the raid. In addition, patrolmen recovered 40 bodies from a well in the backyard, all victims from respectable families." Wei Yuan's words sent shockwaves through the royal study. The ministers began discussing the matter loudly. Human trafficking, a secret brothel, corruption and abuse of power. Any one of these crimes could destroy the careers of all officials involved, especially since it's nearly impossible to cover up. Wei Yuan continued, "Our investigation shows that the owner of the house had ties to the sorcerers of the Wu cult. The demonic markings on the warning bell serve as evidence. According to the confession of the estate owner, he was working under Minister Lu's orders. That estate served as both a pleasure house for high-ranking officials and a secret meeting point for the Wu cult." As Wei Yuan's words fell, an uproar broke out among the senior ministers. Some accused Wei Yuan of defamation, while others called for his execution. The emperor slammed the table, and silence immediately fell in the royal study. His sharp gaze settled on Prime Minister Wang Xinwen. "What do you think, Prime Minister?" The Prime Minister stepped forward and respectfully said, "This matter must be thoroughly investigated. We cannot overlook it." He understood the emperor's intentions clearly. Protecting Minister Lu would earn a significant favor, but also humiliate Wei Yuan. However, if Wei Yuan was supported and Minister Lu was investigated, Minister Lu's career would be ruined, and his faction would lose a key leader. Previously, in the Sangbo case, the Wang faction had tried to frame Minister Lu, causing severe damage to his faction. Although they failed, this was now a rare opportunity. The emperor turned to Wei Yuan and asked, "Where's the suspect?" Wei Yuan shook his head. "Chen Fan was killed last night by a sorcery curse. There is no longer any direct evidence." The royal study fell into a deathly silence. The ministers looked at Wei Yuan. Minister Lu's lips curled into a cold smile, and he stepped forward. "Your Majesty, I have been wronged." Wei Yuan has slandered me. I beg your majesty for justice. Wei Yuan remained calm and said confidently, I request that your majesty summon Constable Su Qian. The emperor frowned. Why is it that little constable again? After a brief pause, he said, summon him. A few minutes later, Su Qian entered the royal study, accompanied by Kai Wei. Su Qian respectfully bowed and greeted the emperor. The female ghost had been sealed inside Siwei's feng shui compass during their journey. Your majesty, if you wish to verify this, you can have someone experience an empathetic connection with the ghost. Su Qian thought darkly to himself. It has to be a man to do this empathy connection. The emperor glanced at the senior eunuch beside him. The most trusted person at the scene was naturally this eunuch who had served him since childhood. The senior eunuch stepped forward and said, I am willing to assist your majesty and bear the burden. Su Qian noticed the eunuch seemed nervous, so he reassured him, don't worry, your grace. There's nothing to fear. This might even be a blessing for you. At most, you'll perceive things from a first-person view, as if being overpowered by a man. But don't worry. It's like watching a movie. You won't feel any actual sensations. At that moment, Chu Kaiwei gently activated the feng shui compass, sending a stream of black mist toward the eunuch's forehead. The mist entered his soul, initiating the empathy connection with the ghost. The eunuch's expression shifted from fear to agony, then to despair and torment. The process lasted for about 15 minutes. Chu Kaiwei retracted the black mist, sealing it back inside the compass. The eunuch let out a wail, fell to his knees, and cried out, Your Majesty, please deliver justice for this humble servant. The emperor asked, What did you see? The eunuch, weeping, recounted the ghost's experiences, eventually reaching the critical part. One night, I overheard a secret meeting by accident. I heard terms like cannons and weapons. I also saw the person meeting with Tamra. It was Minister Liu. The emperor's face darkened instantly. An hour later, Su Qian left the palace on a small horse, riding alongside Wei Yuan's carriage. As they rode, Su Qian remarked, Minister Liu is one of the 7 factions leaders. If we hold him in our grasp, we can uproot the entire faction. Wei Yuan smiled and said, Now isn't the right time to eliminate the 7 faction. If the faction is destroyed now, the biggest beneficiary won't be us. Besides, they still have allies of silver rank. Su Qian didn't dwell further on the topic. Su Qian tested the waters by asking, Can this count as making up for my crimes? Wei Yuan replied, Consider it done. You won't be pursued anymore. As for the other patrolman, that depends on His Majesty's decision. I'll submit a memorial to the palace later. Su Qian felt relieved inside. It's best to let Wei Yuan handle these matters. And with my promotion to Silver Gong rank, it's almost certain now. I should head home first and reassure my second uncle and aunt. In the front hall, his aunt was seated, playing with the little toddler. Suddenly, she saw her unlucky nephew return. Her face changed slightly. Why are you back? Your second uncle said the Ministry of Justice is all over the area. Hurry and get lost. At that moment, the little toddler ran over cheerfully. Big brother, did you bring any treats? Su Qian coldly shattered the girl's hopes. No, I didn't. The toddler, being a pragmatic child, immediately glared at him in frustration, wiggled her small bottom, and went off to play on her own. Only then did Su Qian casually say to his aunt, Everything's been settled. I just came back to inform you. Upon hearing that the matter had been resolved, a hint of a smile appeared on his aunt's face. However, she quickly concealed it, and instead scolded him. Can't you let the family have some peace for once? Su Qian ignored her nagging and said, I've chosen a new residence. I want to take Lin Yu and Lin in to see it. Do you want to come too, aunt? Hearing this, his aunt's eyes sparkled with interest. She had been longing for a new home in the inner city for years, but with 2 money-eating beasts in the family, that dream had always remained out of reach. Setting aside her pride, she said, I have nothing else to do anyway, so I'll go with you to have a look. When they arrived at the residence, his aunt seemed quite satisfied and commented, The location isn't bad. It's not far from the bustling district, and there's a river nearby. The only issue is that the structure looks a bit run down. Su Qian thought to himself, of course it's run down. But he couldn't possibly tell his aunt that. This house has been vacant for many years, not even rented out. The broker originally wanted to sell it for 4,000 taels, but the owner refused to agree no matter what. Su Qian's aunt narrowed her eyes at the old broker. What's the asking price for this house? The broker held up 5 fingers and said, 5,000 taels. Aunt Su immediately began her barrage of bargaining tactics. However, the broker was experienced and thick-skinned, remaining calm despite her efforts. Seeing the elegant older woman and the graceful young girl head into the courtyard, the broker was startled and quickly glanced at Su Qian. However, seeing Su Qian's nonchalant expression, the broker suddenly felt a chill down his spine. People aren't as straightforward these days, he thought, realizing he had done all he could. Who are those 2? He asked. Su Qian responded with a smirk. What do you think? The question left the broker momentarily speechless and awkward. Mother and sister? No, that doesn't fit. They don't look that young. and there's no familial warmth between them. Husband and wife, then? The girl might be his wife, and the older woman is her mother? What about that girl from yesterday then? At this point, Su Qian interrupted. The older one is my aunt, and the younger one is my sister. The broker's eyes widened in surprise. I've never seen someone buy a house and bring both their sister and aunt along. After all, an aunt is usually the wife of an uncle, making her part of the extended family, not the immediate household. Bringing an aunt and cousin to view a house, well, that's a first. Though Aunt Su was harsh with her words, criticizing the house as being in poor condition, deep down, she was actually quite pleased. The property, with its 3 courtyards, was much larger than the Su residence in the outer city, and its layout was far superior. She hesitantly asked, a house in this location, can you really get it for just 5,000 taels? Su Qian pointed toward a well in the distance. A ghost used to haunt that well. I've already verified it with Miss Kaiwei. 2 startled screams, and the sound of someone swallowing nervously echoed simultaneously. The one swallowing nervously, of course, was the little toddler, probably thinking of deep-fried ghosts again. Su Lingyue and Aunt Su were. The little toddler was also scared, but seeing both her sister and she hurried over with her short legs, and hid between her big brother's legs. She then peeked back at the well, torn between fear and curiosity as she continued swallowing nervously. Aunt Su's face was pale, and she grabbed both daughters by the hand, quickly walking toward the exit of the property. We're not buying it. Let's go, she exclaimed. The broker sighed in frustration. Are you toying with me? Su Qian waved his hand dismissively. Stop complaining. Just go to the brokerage office and pay the deposit. The carriage stopped outside the brokerage. Inside were Aunt Su and the 2 sisters. Hearing that Su Qian had gone to pay the deposit, Aunt Su was furious. I won't live there. Let him live in that haunted house by himself. That brat just doesn't want us to benefit from it. Su Lingyue smiled awkwardly and said, Big brother isn't that kind of person. At that moment, Su Qian lifted the curtain and said, It's almost noon. Let's go to Guiwei Tower for lunch. Aunt Su turned her face away with a cold snort. Su Qian explained. The ghost in the house has already been dealt with. If you don't believe me, surely you trust the sorcerer I met 4 days ago? Aunt Su hesitated, staring at Su Qian suspiciously. Su Qian smiled. Why would I lie to you? They drove to Guiwei Tower and booked a private room. Su Qian took out a jade transmission device and contacted person number 2. I remember you said you were investigating the mastermind behind the Yunjo bandits. After a brief pause, person number 2 replied yes. During the crackdown on the bandits, I discovered that various strongholds were well supplied. Person number 4 added, we could try investigating the local government in Yunjo. By the way, isn't there a covert spy network in Yunjo? Person number 2 said, the Duke of Guei is just a powerless prince. I've investigated him. There's nothing suspicious. Su Qian asked, how did you investigate him? Number 2 replied, I sent people to monitor the palace. Su Qian silently mocked him. That's what you call an investigation? That's way too sloppy. He then transmitted a message. I know who's supporting the Yunjo bandits. A series of question marks flashed through number 2 and number 4's minds. What intelligence has number 3 obtained this time? Why does he always have so much information? Getting news from the capital is one thing, since that's his territory, but Yunjo has nothing to do with him. Number 2 was especially shocked. I've been investigating for so long without any leads. How could he possibly know? Number 2 transmitted a message back. What's going on? Tell me the inside story. Number 3, I'll owe you a favor. Su Qian chuckled and said, no need. I admire your character. This one's on the house. The force behind the bandits is the Wu cult from the northeast. The Wu cult is the mastermind behind the Yunjo bandits. This information may not be entirely accurate, so take it as a reference. Su Qian's plan was to let number 2 investigate further, which is why he shared this information. The Wu cult, even if they aren't the direct supporters of the bandits, they're likely involved. Number 2 stared at the words on the jade communication mirror, remaining silent for a long time. So the Wu cult is behind the bandits. Number 2 asked, how did you find out? Through what source? I'm not doubting you. I just want to verify the reliability of the information. Su Qian replied, don't worry. Last night, patrolmen discovered a Wu cult stronghold in the capital. They have close ties with Minister Liu. Su Qian briefly explained the case. Number 2 clenched his fist in excitement. I see now. This information is very important to me. It confirms one of my previous suspicions. Thank you. He lamented. If only Taoist Golden Lotus had recruited you earlier and brought you into the Heaven and Earth network. Golden Lotus interjected. Focus on business. No need for idle chatter. Also, how does the Wu cult support for the Yunjo bandits benefit them? Number 4 agreed with Golden Lotus. Exactly. Yunjo is in the southeast. The Wu cult's base is in. The 2 regions are thousands of miles apart. Su Qian frowned. That's exactly what's puzzling me as well. Whether it's a military alliance or trade partnership, it doesn't seem practical. He transmitted a message to number 2. Can you try looking into it? I trust that with your abilities, you'll be able to get to the bottom of it. At that moment, Number 1 spoke up. The case of Minister Liu reminds me of a detail from the Sangbo Temple incident. The gunpowder was secretly buried in the Eternal Peace Temple by the former Minister of Rites, Zhou Baihu, using materials meant for the ancestral worship ceremony. So who lit the fuse? Number 2 speculated. Could it have been a military officer? Su Qian shook his head. No, it wasn't. If it were a military officer, the patrolman would have found out long ago. All the patrolmen on duty that night were killed. Those not on duty had alibis. But the Minister of Rites doesn't have authority over the military. Number 2 asked. Why is that? Number 1 answered. That's a state secret. Su Qian was speechless. State secret, my foot. It's just that the Emperor has the 4th Division sorcerers conducting truth inquiry on the military each month. Suddenly, a thought struck him. He had an epiphany. He sent a message. Number 1. Are you saying that the Wu cult was involved? They were the ones who ignited the gunpowder inside the Eternal Peace Temple. Number 1 quickly confirmed and replied to Golden Lotus, saying, You're referring to the puppet users, right? Number 1 asked, Taoist, how are you so sure? Golden Lotus scoffed. The art of puppet manipulation is a secret technique known only to certain sections. I know it well. The puppet's abilities are limited, only slightly stronger than an ant, but it can evade detection by experts and infiltrate the Eternal Peace Temple silently. That's not difficult for it, but the puppet could have acted as a trigger for the gunpowder explosion. Number 1 realized. In other words, the Sangbo case involved both the Demon Clan and the Wu cult. This means that their faction likely knew about it too. Su Qian objected. That doesn't seem right. Their faction and the Wu cult are just collaborators, not a superior-subordinate relationship. The Wu cult wouldn't reveal everything to them. Number 1 replied. But one thing is certain. The Wu cult has ties to the Demon Clan. Su Qian muttered. The Demon Clan destroyed Sangbo for a sealed artifact. So what's the Wu cult's objective? It probably isn't the severed hand in the divine box. Otherwise, there'd be a conflict of interest, and they would have fought each other. As Su Qian pondered further, he noticed that the dishes on the table had already been devoured by the 3 women. The little toddler was glowing with satisfaction from eating. Su Qian cursed under his breath, just like Chu Kaiwei. Meanwhile, at the Ministry of Justice prison, a prison guard opened the cell door and called out, Lords, you are free to leave. The immediate reaction of the imprisoned patrolmen was that the Emperor had issued a pardon. Their opponents had achieved their goals, so there was no reason to keep them detained any longer. However, upon exiting the dungeon, they were told to sign and seal documents to reclaim their uniforms and badges. This procedure was familiar to the patrolmen. It indicated they had been acquitted and reinstated as officials. Someone whispered, Did His Majesty pardon us? Highly unlikely. This whole ordeal, it was obviously the result of factional infighting. Factional struggles are always so ruthless and dangerous. As long as there's an opportunity, crush your opponent without mercy. Never resolve conflicts peacefully. Zhang Luzhong quickly speculated that this was a setup. Something moved us out from the criminal department. We retrieved our uniforms, weapons, and official badges. The night patrol guards left in silence. Song Tingfeng from the criminal department laughed. I can't believe we get to see daylight again. Why not go enjoy ourselves tonight at Jiafengxi? A bronze gong officer sighed in silence. We just got out of prison, and you're already eager to get into trouble again? Song Tingfeng smirked. What do you know? Even silver gong officers get locked up. Whether you're corrupt or not doesn't matter. It all depends on whether the superiors want to take you down. Zhang Luzhong thought to himself, he's got a point. Another bronze gong officer added. If Su Ningyan is going, we'll go too. Zhang Luzhong's eyes lit up. He smiled and said to a silver gong beside him, Su Ningyan is a favorite at Jiafengxi, a popular target of admiration from courtesans. Not long ago, Yang Yin and I took a group of rookies to Jiafengxi to drink. Aside from Fuxiang, there were 4 other top courtesans present. Jiafengxi's reputation is well-earned. It made me feel young again. After returning to the office, 3 silver gong officers went to the Hall of Integrity to listen to Wei Yuan's instructions and pledge loyalty. Wei Yuan calmly said, use this opportunity to cleanse the Department of Corruption. Keep your subordinates in check. This time, you should thank, not me, but someone else. That person is Su Qian. This answer surprised the 4 silver gong officers. They found it hard to believe. Zhang Luzhong bowed and asked, Sir Wei, what happened while we were imprisoned? Wei Yuan explained the case of the Ministry of Public Affairs collusion with the Wushan sect. He emphasized Su Qian's key role in solving the case. After leaving the Hall of Integrity, Zhang Luzhong looked visibly frustrated. Feeling down, one of the silver gongs teased, Are you jealous of that bronze gong's repeated achievements? Zhang Luzhong shook his head. I should have fought harder with Yang Yin back then to recruit Su Qian under me. Another silver gong commented, Su, the bronze gong, is indeed a rare talent, but his strength is lacking. Zhang Luzhong instinctively retorted, You don't know anything. You have no idea about him. Halfway through, he stopped himself. Wei Gong had warned him not to reveal Su Qian's potential. The 3 silver gongs noticed his displeasure. Why stop halfway? Zhang Luzhong shook his head. I can't say. One of the silver gongs got angry. Jiang, Are you trying to tease us like a courtesan dancing? Stop messing around and tell us. What's going on with that bronze gong? I find him strange too. Why does Wei Yuan favor him so much? Zhang Luzhong smiled slyly. If you want to know, ask Wei Gong yourself. As night fell, Su Qian returned home and informed his second uncle about buying the haunted house. That house has been vacant for years. It needs thorough renovation. I've already taken Andy and my cousin to see it. The house structure is intact, but some doors and windows are rotting. Su Pingji pondered. A renovation will take about half a month. Su Qian thought. Half a month? It's not like we're going for luxury renovations. Why would it take that long? Su Qian said, let's hire cheap craftsmen. We can get people from the outer city and have them work around the clock. That way, it'll be done in about 7 days. Su Pingji was puzzled. Why from the outer city? The inner city craftsmen are more skilled. Su Qian chuckled. Because outer city carpenters are cheaper. Plus, they don't know the house is haunted. They'll be fine living there. The whole family was speechless. This guy is really cunning. They shook their heads in disbelief. Are you still my adorable nephew? This particular day, Su Qian hadn't gone. That's because he had 2 promises to fulfill next. The first was to help Chu Kaiwei advance to the 16th rank. The second, to give her a special treat. Su Qian had a clear goal, to make a simplified version of seasoning powder. He recalled a video he had watched, posted by a food expert. The expert had collected many ancient recipes and recreated them step by step. The results showed that ancient dishes were not as delicious as expected. The expert concluded that the biggest difference between modern and ancient cuisine was not in the variety or style of dishes, but in the evolution of seasonings. After arriving in this world, Su Qian found himself agreeing with this perspective. Though the chefs at Guiwei Tower were skilled, ordinary household dishes were bland by comparison. Even in the Su family, despite using rich broth, there was a lack of a key culinary breakthrough: seasoning. I only know that MSG's main component is sodium glutamate. It can be extracted through grain fermentation or from kelp. But isn't grain fermentation primarily used for making alcohol? He immediately dismissed the kelp extraction option. It wasn't feasible. The reason was simple. The cost was too high. The capital of Dafeng was located inland, far from the coast. Although there was both trade and maritime shipping, sea products were still considered luxuries, reserved for the wealthy elite. Extracting enough MSG from kelp would require an enormous quantity. One could go bankrupt and still not obtain much MSG. So, he decided to use chicken powder as a substitute. This decision was inspired by a childhood memory, a boring trip to the bathroom, during which he had read the ingredients label carefully. Chicken powder contained guanylate, a flavor enhancer comparable to MSG. Guanylate was abundant in shiitake mushrooms. Su Qian then grabbed a large, fat hen. He then simmered the shiitake mushrooms and the hen in a pot. Once the broth reduced, he added water again, repeating the process 3 times. This continued until the essence of the chicken and mushrooms was fully absorbed into the broth. He then filtered out the residue, leaving only the concentrated broth. The pot was placed in the cool shade of the backyard to naturally dry and solidify into blocks. He took the solidified extract, crushed it into powder, and thus, the simplified version of chicken powder was complete. Su Qian smiled slightly. Though it's still quite rough in quality, I have a feeling that little Do Ding will eat 10 bowls of food today. Su Qian carried the chicken powder to the kitchen. The cooks were surprised. Why is Master Su here in this greasy, dirty kitchen? They exclaimed. Su Qian held a bowl in his hands and calmly said, I've made a special recipe. I'm here to help you with cooking. The cooks curiously glanced at the bowl in his hands. One of them reached out to touch it. What is this? Su Qian slapped his hand away. This is something special. Don't look at it randomly. It's a secret recipe. With that, he scooped a small spoonful of chicken powder and added it to the soup. After tasting a small sip, he nodded. The flavor has improved significantly, but it's still not comparable to real chicken powder. Guanylate and sodium glutamate complement each other to truly match the taste. For my previous life, I'll have to create MSG. One of the cooks tasted the soup and widened his eyes in shock. He even forgot to keep stirring the food on the stove. This flavor, it's both familiar and strange. It tastes like chicken, but there's no way chicken alone could be this savory. With just a small amount, the soup's umami has risen to a whole new level. This is something broth alone can't achieve. At the Su residence, Su Lingwei arrived just in time for dinner. Glancing around, she asked sweetly, Where's Big Brother? He's usually around by now. Big Brother was already sitting at the table, waiting for dinner, casually playing with Su Lingying. Second Uncle Su said, It's a rest day today. He might have gone to Jiafengxi. Su Lingwei frowned. Father, you're always spouting nonsense. Big Brother doesn't even go to brothel. Second Uncle sighed. I used to think that too. Your Big Brother, who once avoided brothels, is now being chased by the top courtesans at Jiafengxi. Su Pingji mused internally. Now that he's a chi cultivator, he doesn't need to abstain anymore. Going to Jiafengxi is only natural. What man wouldn't go? Suddenly, he sensed a murderous intent nearby. He quickly corrected himself. Your father and I, we never go to such places. Not willingly, at least. It's always for social obligations. He continued. The men of the Su family don't like frequenting such places. Su Lingyue believed her father's words, thinking of her proud second brother and honest big brother. They didn't seem like the type to indulge in such places. Little Do Ding sniffed the air and exclaimed, "It smells so good." At that moment, the cooks entered with the dishes. There was stir-fried pork with glossy bamboo shoots, vinegar-sautéed cabbage with yam soup, stir-fried eggs with chives, lotus root and pork rib stew, and red oil white mushrooms. There was also Su Qian's own fried pork knuckles. Su Pingji exclaimed, "Wow, today's food smells incredible." He eagerly grabbed a piece of crispy pork knuckle and stuffed it into his mouth to chew. Shocked, he exclaimed, "This is unbelievably delicious." His aunt rolled her eyes. "You're exaggerating, as always." She took a bite herself and her eyes widened in astonishment. "Today's food is so different from usual. How did you do it?" The cook smiled and said, "It's Master Su's secret recipe." His aunt was surprised. "Where did you get this recipe?" Su Qian explained, "I just thought our home-cooked meals were too bland. The food at Guiwei Tower is too expensive, so I experimented a bit on my own. Seems like it turned out pretty well." At this point, Little Do Ding had climbed onto the table, trying to grab food with his tiny hands. Little Do Ding began pulling the dishes closer to himself. With his eyebrows raised, he shouted, "These are all mine." The family quickly pulled him down from the table. This little rascal would do anything for food. The family chuckled. The next day, Su Qian returned. The Red Gongs learned that without Su Qian's intervention, many of their fates might have been drastically altered. Grateful, they sincerely thanked him one after another. After finally dealing with them all, Su Qian strapped on his sword and began his afternoon duties. He ran into Song Tingfeng, who said, "Su, you haven't been to Jiafangxi in a while, have you?" Su Qian sighed internally. "I've been having this strange feeling. It's like I'm not the one visiting the courtesans. They're the ones coming after me," he said with resignation. "I feel like I'm reaching the peak of qi cultivation. I'm planning to try advancing to shen cultivation." Zhu Guangxiao and Song Tingfeng stared at him, dumbfounded. "Peak qi cultivation? We're both at peak qi cultivation too. It's not that difficult. The hard part is earning enough merit to obtain the diagrams." Song Tingfeng added bitterly, "You'd better save up merit. But with what you've accumulated since Sangbo, you probably have more than enough already." Su Qian casually changed the subject. "I'm thinking of saving up for two." Zhu Guangxiao laughed. "Poor Miss Fuxiang is going to suffer from that." The three of them laughed and talked as they walked. Suddenly, their attention was drawn to a tall, imposing monk. It was Monk Hengyuan. Hengyuan strode forward and greeted, "Lord Su." Su Qian frowned. "Is he here to borrow money again?" He quickly cut him off. "Master Hengyuan, I'm on official duty. Let's keep this brief. I only get a monthly salary of 5 taels of silver. My pockets are empty." Song Tingfeng and Zhu Guangxiao glared at Hengyuan with suspicion. "So he's here to borrow money from Lord Su?" they muttered. Noticing how swiftly Su Qian refused, Hengyuan fell silent for a long time. Finally, Hengyuan clasped his hands in a gesture of respect and said, "I understand." Watching the tall monk walk away, Su Qian was suddenly reminded of his father, who had once traveled a long distance to bring him food at school, only to be met with Su's complaints for being late. It was the same lonely figure walking away. "Wait," Su Qian called out to him. "How much do you need to borrow this time? Let's be clear first. If it's too much, I won't lend it. I really don't have much money right now." Hengyuan stopped in his tracks and turned back silently. Instead of speaking, he bowed respectfully. Su Qian said, "Before we proceed, I have a request. I want to visit the health hall." Hengyuan agreed without hesitation. "Sure." Su Qian invited Song Tingfeng and Zhu Guangxiao to come along. Song Tingfeng raised an eyebrow. "Why? Do you want us to tag along because you didn't bring any money?" Su Qian smiled without replying. After taking a few steps, he suddenly stepped on something hard. Instinctively, he picked it up and proudly displayed it in his palm. "See? Money has come to me." Song Tingfeng and Zhu Guangxiao were baffled. With puzzled expressions, they followed Su and Hengyuan out of the inner city towards the health hall in the east. This area was a slum. Everywhere, people wore patched up and threadbare cotton clothes. Their faces were sallow and thin, and their eyes looked lifeless. Hengyuan warned, "Keep an eye on your wallets. While these people wouldn't dare or be able to steal your silver, don't engage in any acts of charity here. It'll only put you in an awkward..." Su Qian nodded. "I get it. If I show any kindness, they'll see me as a fat sheep ready to be fleeced." He then asked, "I don't come to places like this often. Why don't these people work?" Hengyuan explained, "Most of the people living here are displaced refugees without farmland. They might have had land before, but they couldn't bear the heavy taxes and burdens, so they gave up their land. They came to the city to seek a livelihood, but there's no space for them to survive here. Occasionally, some come here hoping for handouts. But to survive, some inevitably turn to crime." As they spoke, the four of them arrived at the health hall. Hengyuan said, "Some officials came to repair the courtyard recently, but I replaced the new signboard with the old one. Being too flashy isn't necessarily good for a place like the health hall. As they entered the health hall, Hung Yuan led them further inside and said, Lord Su, I understand you have your struggles. I'm not asking for money. I've heard you have good connections with the sorcerers of the 4 heavenly swords. I need your help finding the white-robed sorcerers. Save a child. As he spoke, he opened the back gate. The first thing that caught their eye was a thin, emaciated black dog curled up on the ground. Hearing the noise, the black dog stirred slightly, but couldn't stand up. It struggled to lift its head, and upon seeing strangers, its dim eyes instinctively showed a pleading expression, a pitiful attempt to seek favor, fortune like the East Sea, great prosperity. Su Qian was struck by lightning, remembering something Hung Yuan had mentioned when they first met. This is that child. Hung Yuan's face showed compassion. He could only repeat the same 8 words. I found him while saving my junior brother. Because of the horrible treatment he suffered, he won't survive much longer. I've been nurturing his body as best I can during this time, barely keeping him alive. But this can't last. His body is in terrible condition. He must receive treatment. Otherwise, he'll be dead within 3 days. Ordinary doctors can't save him. Only the sorcerers of the 4 heavenly swords can. I had no choice but to seek your help, Lord Su, Hung Yuan said. Song Tingfeng hesitated for a moment. Perhaps death would be a better fate for him, he suggested. Hung Yuan quietly replied, Every morning when the sun rises, his eyes light up. I can see the longing in them, the simple and pure desire to keep living. To you all, he might be as insignificant as the weeds in the courtyard, but even weeds want to survive with resilience. Su Qian gazed deeply at the black dog. I understand, he said. I'll ask the sorcerers of the 4 heavenly swords to come and treat him. Master, if you ever need silver in the future, feel free to come to me, but I can only give you 3 coins of silver per day. Song Tingfeng and Zhu Guangxiao were slightly moved. 3 coins daily? Keep in mind that 8 coins equal 1 tael. Even without deducting expenses, Su Qian's monthly salary was only around 4 or 5 taels of actual silver. Where did he get so much money? Oh, right. He had 1,000 taels of gold rewarded by the emperor. Well, that explains it. Hung Yuan shook his head, intending to refuse, but Su Qian reassured him, Don't worry. This money is legitimate, almost like finding it by chance. Finally, Hung Yuan nodded and soothed the black dog. He then led Su Qian and the others back to the front courtyard. Please wait here for a moment. I have something to discuss with Lord Su. Song Tingfeng and Zhu Guangxiao nodded and walked away. The two entered a simple room, and Hung Yuan closed the door behind them. He clasped his hands together and said, Lord Su, your energy is abundant. Your spirit is strong. Are you on the verge of entering the Shin cultivation stage? Su Qian was surprised. How can he see it so clearly? I only knew Hung Yuan was a high-ranking martial monk, but I had no idea he was this perceptive. He straightened up and asked, Master, do you have any advice for me? Hung Yuan asked, Do you have a cultivation diagram? Yes, I do, Su Qian confirmed. Hung Yuan nodded in understanding. As a monk, I cannot provide direct assistance. I won't be able to repay you for the silver you've given me, Lord Su. I had originally planned to gift you a cultivation diagram when you reach the peak of Qi cultivation, but since you already have such a method, I'll offer you a different skill instead. I am an 8-pin martial monk. I know none of the mysterious Buddhist spells. I only have a few martial techniques, the most prominent being the lion's roar. This technique is both a visualization method and a supreme skill. Su Qian felt a bit disappointed upon hearing this. A technique based on shouting? Sounds like it's made for brute force warriors. Not exactly sophisticated. Noticing Su Qian's disheartened expression, Hung Yuan smiled. Would you like me to demonstrate the power of the lion's roar? Su Qian thought to himself, just don't make me deaf, alright? Still, he nodded and asked, are you sure it won't affect the elderly and children in the courtyard? Hung Yuan shook his head. I'll keep the power confined within this room. With that, Hung Yuan took a deep breath, stood in a proper stance, and threw a punch in a normal posture. Su Qian scoffed internally. That punch looks ordinary, not threatening at all. But before he could finish his thought, a thunderous roar echoed, shaking Su Qian's brain. He was momentarily dazed and disoriented. When he regained his senses, a fist the size of a clay pot was right at the tip of his nose. Hung Yuan calmly explained, this technique directly targets the soul. Even those with advanced cultivation or spiritual defenses would struggle to resist it. Su Qian was, this technique is perfect for me. It pairs flawlessly with my heaven-splitting blade strike. My biggest concern was missing my attack, but with the control effect of the lion's roar, I won't have to worry anymore. Seriously, is this guy really just an 8-pin monk? Hung Yuan solemnly took out a booklet from his robe and handed it to Su Qian. This book contains methods for cultivating internal energy, as well as my personal insights on cultivation. Su Qian reached out to take it, but Hung Yuan pressed down on the cover and solemnly said, you must return it later. Su Qian cursed internally. Why did you have to say that? Have you heard of my legendary IOUs? They left the room and reunited with the two colleagues outside. After discussing it briefly, They pooled together a tael of silver, donate to the health hall. As the three were about to leave, Song Tingfeng suddenly turned back and ran inside. He stared silently at an elderly woman, his face twisted in anger and determination. The woman looked at him with fear. Gritting his teeth, Song Tingfeng tossed his money pouch to her. Damn you, Su Mingyan. If I ever come to a place like this with you again, I'll take your surname. Su Qian sneered. I don't care if you take my surname. Just let your future son carry my name instead. After the three had left, the elderly woman opened the pouch. Inside, there were 5 taels of silver, Song Tingfeng's entire monthly salary. It was also meant for his visit to Jiafangxi that night. Back in the inner city, Su Qian handed his street patrol duties to his colleagues. He then went to Guanxin Tower. After searching around for a while without finding Kai Wei, he grabbed an alchemist and asked, "Where's Lady Kai Wei?" The alchemist replied, "The Grand Princess came by. Junior sister Kai Wei is with her at the Bagua platform." Su Qian was delighted. "Ah, both my big wife and little wife are here." He then asked, "Where's Senior Brother Song?" The alchemist answered, "Senior Brother Song borrowed a death row prisoner from Tiger Fong and is conducting research in the secret room." A chill ran down Su Qian's spine. He immediately gave up the idea of meeting Song Qing. Instead, he asked the alchemist to take him to the workshop. His goal was to deliver something to Kai Wei. At that moment, 2 light footsteps approached. Grand Princess asked, "How did you discover that haunted house?" Su Mingyan replied, "Su Ningyan wanted to buy a house, so I accompanied him to check the feng shui." "I already know that," the Grand Princess said. "I'm asking how you discovered that house." "Your Highness, that's a strange question. It was the old caretaker who showed it to us." The Grand Princess frowned. "Old caretaker? Special about him?" Kai Wei pulled out a pastry from somewhere and said casually, "Well, he seemed pretty decent. Want some, Your Highness?" The Grand Princess shook her head and declined. "Pretty decent? What do you mean by that?" Kai Wei, munching on the pastry, said, "Su Qian thought the haunted house was cheap, and the caretaker kept trying to stop us, worried something bad might happen." The Grand Princess's face darkened. "Is she implying that I'm not rational enough? I actually tried to get information from her." Meanwhile, Kai Wei was lost in her own world. "I love hanging out with Huiqing. She never competes with me for food, but if it were that annoying Su Ningyan, and I made a polite gesture, he'd probably eat it for real." The Grand Princess realized that trying to get information from Kai Wei was as pointless as winking at a blind person. With this thought, Huiqing's expression sharpened. "You've been spending too much time with Su Mingyan lately. Do you intend to interact with other men this frequently as well?" Kai Wei adjusted her posture and awkwardly replied, "Well, yes. He's always finding excuses to visit me." The Grand Princess pondered silently, when suddenly a faint, delicious aroma filled the air, making their mouths water involuntarily. Kai Wei swallowed and said, "Wow, it smells so good from the workshop." In the workshop, Su Qian was working with dough, kneading, rolling, and shaping it, with focused concentration. Soon, he tossed the freshly made noodles into boiling water and began cooking them. He then took out a porcelain bottle and poured some improvised chicken seasoning into the broth. Suddenly, a formation in the workshop activated, emitting a sound. Suddenly, a defiant voice echoed, "With the moon in my hand, I reach for the stars. None in this world are like me." Su Qian was startled and shivered. "What the hell is wrong with you? You almost gave me a heart attack." Su Qian composed himself and suppressed his emotions. "If you want to play, then I'll play along." With a calm demeanor, he said, "You're here." The figure paused. This simple, deep tone carried the weight of long-lost familiarity, as if they were old friends. A sense of time's passage and weariness arose. The man responded in the same solemn tone, "Yes, I am here." Su Qian sighed deeply. His voice hoarse. 20 years have passed since we last met, and you still prefer to face away from the world." The figure in white trembled slightly. The phrase "facing away from the world" struck him with profound resonance. He felt as if he were a supreme, solitary being, cold yet invincible at the peak of existence. After a moment of contemplation, he said faintly, "Even so, I was still drawn to you." Su Qian internally mocked. He really knows how to keep the act going. This king of poses does have some skills. Out loud, Su Qian said, "I knew it. The moment this batch of 9 turned, you'd make your move. You still won't let me go." The king of poses snorted coldly. "The virtuous are meant to possess treasures." Su Qian chuckled. "Have you paid homage to Yang Qianhuan?" The atmosphere in the workshop suddenly grew tense. But at that moment, a cheerful voice broke the tension. "What are you two doing?" Su Qian quickly bowed his head, concealing his embarrassment, while Yang Qianhuan remained unmoved, still standing with his back to everyone. "Even if junior sister pleads for you, I will not yield." Kai Wei asked, "Senior brother Yang, why are you in the workshop?" Yang Qianhuan awkwardly laughed. "I came for the noodles." Kai Wei cheerfully ran to the stove, drooling and smiling. "How did you know I hadn't eaten?" Kai Wei asked excitedly. Su Qian chuckled. "I promised you, remember? I'd serve you noodles." He turned to the Grand Princess and asked, "Would your Highness like a bowl as well?" The aloof Huiqing hesitated slightly. but her gaze involuntarily fell on the bowl. After some awkward hesitation, she nodded. All right. Su Qian then looked at Yang Qianhuan, the king of poses. Come on, join us. I've always wanted to see what you look like. As soon as that thought crossed his mind, he saw a formation activate beneath Yang's feet. The next moment, Yang disappeared, taking a bowl of noodles with him. Kaiwei took a bite and her eyes lit up. Her taste buds were overwhelmed by the flavor. Every cell in her body seemed to be screaming, delicious. The Grand Princess, though eating gracefully, was finishing her meal rather quickly. In a quiet, empty room, Yang Qianhuan crouched in a corner, slurping noodles with great relish. This kid is interesting, he thought. He knows alchemy, speaks well, and cooks delicious noodles too. As he pondered, Yang suddenly paused. This kind of attention and admiration, isn't this exactly what I wanted? This kid might be a strong rival. Back at the stove, Kaiwei eagerly looked at Su Qian and asked, how did you make such delicious noodles? Su Qian replied proudly. It's my secret recipe, extracted through unique alchemical methods. It's also something I'll teach you, as part of your alchemy training. But it's difficult. Even I only have a partial mastery of it. If you can't master it, you won't get to eat these noodles again, or anything better. The young beauty with an oval face widened her eyes. Her fighting spirit ignited. The Grand Princess suddenly asked, did you create this yourself? Su Qian nodded. I poured my heart and soul into creating this for Lady Kaiwei. The Grand Princess gave Kaiwei a meaningful glance, and said in a subtly teasing tone, you seem to care a lot about Kaiwei. Huiqing teased. Su Qian instantly regretted his careless words. Why did he say something as exaggerated as pouring my heart and soul for Kaiwei? How could he say such a thing in front of his main wife? Hurriedly, Su Qian explained, Lady Kaiwei is my benefactor. Of course, I care about her. Kaiwei felt a burst of happiness inside, though she tried to stay composed. How much do you care? She asked playfully. Enough to grant every request, Su Qian replied coolly. Then he suddenly remembered that Huiqing was also his benefactor, and added, the same goes for the princess. I grant every request from her as well. The Grand Princess, with matters to attend to, politely excused herself and left. Su Qian pulled out a prepared alchemy manual, which detailed the process for making chicken essence, and the concept of umami seasoning. He discussed it with Lady Kaiwei for a long time. Then Su Qian suddenly said, by the way, I'd like to ask the Celestial Monitoring Bureau for help. Just as he said this, a formation ripple spread through the hall, followed by that same defiant voice. With the moon in my hand, I reach for the stars. None in this world are like me. What do you need help with? Su Qian's expression darkened. In a stern tone, he said, this is a confidential matter of the Bureau. He explained the situation of the ailing child. Senior Brother Liang, that child won't last more than 3 days. I'd like to request your help in saving him. Su Qian had avoided asking Song Qing for help, fearing that the concept of life and death might trigger his unstable mind. He didn't want the child to die because of another of Song's insane experiments. Yang Qianhuan readily agreed, but then he paused and asked, why did you avoid mentioning this to Kaiwei? Su Qian shook his head. Why should I tell you? Yang Qianhuan was momentarily stumped, unable to come up with a response. He let out an awkward laugh, trying to maintain his dignity. You and I share a noble quality, he said. Late that night at the wellness hall, Master Heng Yuan, who was meditating, suddenly felt a premonition. His eyes snapped open, filled with a sharp alertness. Someone is here, he muttered. Heng Yuan left his room. He quickly walked to the woodshed in the backyard. The door to the woodshed was half open. Heng Yuan. He rushed inside. Suddenly, he saw a man in white standing there. Who are you? Heng Yuan asked. The man sneered and recited, with the moon in my hand, I reach for the stars. None in this world are like me. Hearing such words, even the normally composed monk Heng Yuan felt a slight urge to compete with the man. The white-robed man continued, it seems you don't recognize me. Imagine that, a man in the capital not knowing who I am. With that, a formation activated beneath his feet, and he vanished without a trace. Heng Yuan quickly stepped forward and checked the condition of the child. His breathing was steady, and his pulse normal, much better than it had been earlier in the day. At that moment, Heng Yuan noticed a porcelain bottle and a prescription sheet next to the child. He finally understood. The man had come to treat the child. He was a celestial alchemist, likely of the 4th rank. A formation master, Heng Yuan murmured, feeling a mix of surprise and respect. I didn't expect Su Qian to be able to call upon a 4th-ranked alchemist to save this child. Meanwhile, Song Qing, after helping a prisoner reincarnate, was sleep-deprived and heading downstairs for food. A fellow alchemist at the door remarked, how many has it been today? That old prisoner, Li, hasn't he nearly been exhausted by Song Qing? Song Qing ignored the chatter. As he walked, lost in thought. Actually, grafting techniques could be applied to the human body. Damaged organs could potentially be but could I go even further? Down to the minute level? Perhaps regrowing severed limbs? That's a unique ability of monks in the 3rd rank. If I could research this, within the realm of alchemy, It would definitely shock the entire world. But Su Ningyan had once said, bioalchemy should operate on a finer level. I've got it. I could create a device similar to a telescope, one that would allow me to observe microscopic elements, as small as dust particles. Suddenly, Song Qing sniffed the air. Where's that aroma coming from? He followed the scent downstairs to the kitchen area. There, he saw Chu Kaiwei, giving orders to a white-clad assistant as something steamed in a pot. Song Qing immediately grinned and approached. Such thoughtfulness, Sister Kaiwei. Chu Kaiwei shooed him away. Go, go. This is an alchemy technique Su Qian taught me. If it succeeds, it'll bring delicious flavors to the entire world. Song Qing froze for a moment. Alchemy technique? Chu Kaiwei proceeded to explain. The principles behind chicken essence and MSG. Song Qing muttered. Su Ningyan really is something else. Extracting essential components from herbs to make pills, purifying metal from, or to forge weapons, and now extracting umami from mushrooms to create MSG. It aligns perfectly with the knowledge he shared in his lectures. Alchemy involves mastering many hidden secrets, extracting the unseen. Chu Kaiwei sighed. He talked about MSG, but I don't have the full process yet. He only mentioned the basic concept, that it could be extracted from grains. Song Qing gently patted her on the head. I'll help you, sister. The next morning, the renovation of Su Qian's new residence was complete. His aunt took command like a general, directing servants as they moved items. Her assertive demeanor and ordinary looks gave off a rather unrefined impression, but when it came to his 36-year-old aunt, who maintained her youthful charm, with a radiant and beautiful face, and a curvaceous figure, she was a sight to behold. Su Qian thought to himself, I wonder if Lin Yu will age as gracefully as my mother in another 20 years. Or perhaps she'll even surpass that. With that thought, Su Qian sighed. Lin Yu is also at the age to get married. I wonder which lucky man will have the fortune to marry such a beautiful girl. Thanks to hiring enough carriages, it only took 2 trips to move all their belongings. Although Su Qian had bought the house, his aunt and second uncle were elders, so the main house was reserved for them. As per his aunt's wishes, the west wing rooms were assigned to Su Qian, since he would eventually get married. Lin Yu and Xian Yin were placed in the east wing. However, Su Lingyue, being persistent, insisted on living next to her elder brother. His aunt rebuked. You're a young lady. How can you live so close to your brother? Don't you have any sense of propriety? Su Lingyue got upset and started arguing loudly with her mother. Overwhelmed, his aunt finally gave in and allowed her to stay there. Both Xian Yin and Su Lingyue were given rooms in the west wing. His aunt remarked, when Su Qian gets married, we'll move Lin Yu and Xian Yin to the north wing. Su Qian was slightly reluctant. If they live so close, my late-night outings to the pleasure houses will easily be discovered by my sister. He'll complain non-stop about it. The youngest child was assigned to stay with their uncle and aunt. After all, young children often struggle to adjust to new surroundings, and his aunt worried that she might have nightmares. Su Qian quickly set up his own room. His previous courtyard had little decoration, so there wasn't much to arrange. He stepped outside to bask in the sun, and suddenly noticed the youngest child squatting near the well. What are you doing there? Seeing his capable elder brother approach, the child let out a sigh of relief. Big brother, there's a ghost here. Su Qian was puzzled. Then why are you squatting by the well? The child frowned, and replied, Sister said the ghost likes to eat. Su Qian was even more baffled. And then? The little one made a mysterious hand gesture, then whispered, I'm luring him out. Big brother, speak softly, or he'll hear us. Su Qian felt a headache coming on. So, this kid is still thinking about catching and frying a ghost? Su Qian gave a thumbs up. You sure know how to adapt to the situation, genius. This little one had already found their own life goal at such a young age. In this world, there's nothing I can't eat, only whether I want to eat it. Willing to use oneself as bait for good food. That determination and resilience. In some ways, this child was a genius. Su Qian turned to leave. All right, keep at it. Once you catch the ghost, Big brother will make something delicious from it. Night quickly fell. Su Qian lay in his spacious and comfortable new room, staring at the polished wooden ceiling. Oh right, I didn't send a letter to Erlang about the move. Not my time to sleep. In the eastern master bedroom, Su Qian's aunt put the youngest child to bed and turned to her husband, worried. Dear, when Ningyan gets married, do you think his wife will fight me for control of the household? Will they make us move to the West Wing? I hear daughters-in-law can be quite vicious, always scheming against their mothers-in-law. His aunt was fortunate. When she married Su's second uncle, his parents had already passed. She had never suffered under an oppressive mother-in-law. Su's second uncle replied nonchalantly, with your temper and personality, you wouldn't stand a chance. She was speechless at that and huffed. Maybe Ningyan will marry a fool. His aunt perked up at that suggestion. Yes, a simpleton would be easier to handle. She began silently praying for her nephew to marry an easily manipulated. Then, she suddenly remembered her son. Oh no, I haven't written to Erlang yet. He doesn't know we moved. What if he goes to the old place and can't find us? Second uncle calmly said, you don't need to worry about that. You can't even read properly. Ningyan can write the letter. Go to sleep. I have to stay up for my night watch duties. His aunt felt reassured upon hearing this, knowing that although her nephew often argued with them, he was reliable with important matters. Soon, she no longer dwelled on whether her son would find his way home, and went asleep peacefully. Later that night, Su Qian was abruptly awakened by a scream. He sat up and instinctively reached for the black gold saber leaning against his bed. He stepped outside and found Lin Yu's maid frozen on the ground, her face pale, staring at the well, shivering and unable to speak. His aunt and Lin Yu also rushed out, both feeling an unsettling chill, without knowing exactly what had happened. Su Qian approached the maid, asking, what did you see? She pointed to the well, trembling. There's a head in the well. His aunt's face turned ghostly white. Didn't you say the Four Heavens Monastery handled this? Su Qian raised his hand to calm them down. Don't panic, he signaled. He cautiously approached the well. The vengeful spirit in the well had indeed been exorcised. The ghost-breeding well near the bandits' hideout was purified too, so logically, such things shouldn't reappear. Could it be? Su Qian strode over quickly, circling around the well. Sure enough, he saw Little Bean sitting beside it, already fast asleep. Su Qian sighed, feeling a headache coming. I knew it was him. He gently tapped the boy's head with his sword hilt. Why are you out here? Little Bean blinked groggily and yawned. Big brother. I was hungry, so I came out looking for food. Then, gazing at the well, he grinned. He's hiding really well. He even made it all the way to our doorstep, and yet it still won't come out. Su Qian sighed and carried him back inside. No need to worry, Aunt. There's nothing at the well. His aunt frowned and crossed her arms. You little troublemaker, scaring everyone in the middle of the night. Su Qian interrupted her, annoyed. He was just hungry. Let the kitchen bring him some snacks. He reassured his sister, his aunt, and the maids. Then he grabbed some snacks to feed Little Bean. After that, he headed back to bed. But just as he lay down, he heard a knock at the door. His sister Su Lingyue's clear and sweet voice called out, Big brother? Su Qian sighed. What is it now? Why are you knocking in the middle of the night? Lingyue hesitated. I can't sleep, neither can Mom. She was telling me about the ghosts in the house. Now we're both scared. Father's not here either, and we don't dare sleep. Su Qian was speechless. What does that have to do with me? Do you expect me to play mahjong all night with you guys? He patiently said. Don't be afraid. There are no ghosts here. Lingyue didn't respond right away. After a brief pause, she spoke with a plaintive tone. Big brother, can't you keep us company? Su Qian shook his head. If it were just you, maybe I'd consider it, but not with Aunt there too. Lingyue, being simple-minded, shifted all the blame to her mom. I know it's unfair, but she really insisted I come and ask you. I told her you have work tomorrow, but she won't take no for an answer. In the end, Su Qian reluctantly agreed. Second uncle must be out having fun at the pleasure house, and I'm stuck guarding his wife and daughter. At that moment, Auntie whispered nervously, what if it sneaks in through the window? What if Lingyue falls asleep? Lingyue, clutching her blanket tightly, whimpered, Mom, don't scare me like that, Mom. Lingyue scolded gently. My brother has a sword with him. Hearing that her nephew was guarding outside with a weapon, their aunt finally relaxed. She tentatively called out, Ningyan? Outside. Su Qian replied grumpily, yes, I'm here. So, he made a habit of coughing every now and then. The women inside felt reassured hearing his deep, steady cough. They were no longer afraid. After a while, his aunt grumbled, Lingyue, don't cling to me so much. It's too hot. Lingyue pouted and whined, Mom. Despite her complaints, their aunt softened inside. Lowering her voice, she said, Lingyue, you really are growing up. It's about time you got married. Su Qian, overhearing the conversation, initially didn't think much of it. But when he picked up on the odd tone in his aunt's voice, he understood immediately. His aunt continued, since you live right next to your cousin, be careful when you bathe. Warriors have sharp senses. Stay alert. In the dark, Lingyue's eyes sparkled mischievously. Mom, are you saying my brother would spy on me? Su Qian nearly choked on his own spit, horrified. I wouldn't. Never. I've bathed with courtesans at the brothel. There's no need for that. His aunt, as usual, was relentless. Unable to confront him directly, she stirred trouble with her insinuations. Their pure sibling bond was under attack. His aunt reassured her daughter playfully, if your cousin doesn't spy on you, there's no problem. With that, she glanced toward the door. Hearing Su Qian's periodic coughs, she felt reassured and went to sleep. The next morning, during breakfast, second uncle Su Pingji returned. He didn't carry any signs of debauchery. Su Qian realized his uncle really had been on night duty, not at the brothel. His aunt, now fully relaxed, recounted last night's events. Little Lingyin ran out in the middle of the night to sleep by the well. Good thing Ningyan was around. If you weren't there last night, it really might have turned into a ghost story. his aunt muttered, relieved. Second uncle Su Pingji asked with a raised brow, why was Ling Yin sleeping by the well in the middle of the night? Su Qian smirked and pointed at his aunt. Blame her. She told him that frying ghosts in oil makes them taste better than anything. He got greedy. Second uncle looked at the little boy and sighed. That does sound like something Ling Yin would do. After breakfast, Su Qian reported to the yamen for duty. He checked in at Chunfeng Hall with Li Yuchen. Seeing that he had no assigned tasks for the day, he planned to visit Yangshengtang again, bringing along Song Tingfeng and Zhu Guangxiao. However, the two stubbornly refused to accompany him. Left with no choice, he went alone. Upon arrival, he met number 6, Heng Yuan, in the Black Dock. Hearing that the child's condition had improved, Su Qian breathed a sigh of relief. It felt as if a weight had been lifted from his mind. Heng Yuan quietly commented, Su Darren, when you first saw the child, you said something curious. You remarked, it's that child. It sounded like you recognized him, but I remember that you two have never crossed paths before. Su Qian's heart skipped a beat. The emotional shock from that day had caused him to accidentally slip up. In retrospect, he realized he had also picked up some coins in front of them. While finding money wasn't inherently suspicious, anyone would wonder about their luck. Number 6 might have begun to speculate, possibly even associating him with number 3. Outwardly composed, Su Qian replied, I heard number 3 mention it once. He didn't elaborate further, letting Heng Yuan fill in the gaps with his imagination. For one thing, Heng Yuan would surely question the hierarchy within their supposed organization. The Tian Di Hui wasn't a typical secret group. Most people knew it as an organization composed of Taoists under Taoist Jinlian. However, the true Tian Di Hui was made up of people connected through fragments of the Earth Book, a truly hidden power. How could number 3 casually hand down such a thing to subordinates? Number 6 would inevitably question this hierarchy. However, he might even investigate further. As he digs deeper, he'll learn that Su Darren's cousin is a student at the Confucian Academy. By then, he'll probably think he's uncovered some great mystery. Heng Yuan didn't say much, but his expression was contemplative. Su Qian caught every subtle reaction. As expected, his prediction was accurate. Honestly, revealing my identity isn't that big of a deal, he thought. I just bragged too much online. If anyone finds out, it'd be so embarrassing. With that thought, Su Qian decided not to linger any longer. He bid farewell and quickly left the Star Observation Tower. Soon after, he received a letter from Sishi Yangwen's white-robed courier. Without delay, he headed there. On the 7th floor of the Alchemy lab, he met Song Qing and Chu Kaiwei. Both had matching dark circles under their eyes. Su Qian couldn't help but joke. You've joined the ranks of time management masters, huh? Miss Kaiwei, you should really get some rest. Chu Kaiwei, with a blank stare, replied, I haven't slept in 3 days. At that moment, Song Qing handed Su Qian a porcelain bottle. We summoned you for a reason, he said. Miss Kaiwei has made a significant breakthrough in alchemy. Take a look. Su Qian opened the bottle, poured a little into his palm, and cautiously smelled it. He hesitated before tasting a small amount. An intense umami flavor spread across his tongue. His taste buds tingled as if ignited. How on earth did you create this? He asked, astonished. Song Qing smirked. Want to know the details? Ask Kaiwei. She'll write up the full process later. You tell me first. Does it taste like what you expected? Su Qian nodded thoughtfully. The taste is spot on. Now, I just need to confirm it's non-toxic. Rest assured, it's not poisonous, Song Qing assured him, but it's far more valuable than poison. Su Qian raised a brow in curiosity. What do you mean by that? If this is to be promoted nationwide, the court will surely monopolize it. Everything that Sishi Yangwen has ever produced has been managed by the court. The annual profits are substantial for Sishi Yangwen. I've discussed this with Brother Yang, and we've agreed to give you a share. Su Qian was momentarily stunned. I only provided the concept of umami and some theoretical guidelines, but Miss Kaiwei and Song Qing did the real work in alchemy. Still, being called Su Baipiao isn't without reason. It's only fair. How much silver will I earn annually? Song Qing pondered for a moment. It depends on how the court decides to sell it. For just one city, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of taels. Tens of thousands? Su Qian's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't believe his ears. Tens of thousands of taels, in one city alone? And that's just in the capital. Imagine nationwide sales. His mind raced with possibilities. He struggled to comprehend the potential fortune. Su Qian clasped Song Qing's hand tightly. Our friendship will last forever. Through thick and thin, till the seas dry up and the stones crumble. In the Imperial Palace's royal garden, Emperor Yuanjing strolled with Wei Yuan. The emperor remarked thoughtfully. Withering frost kills all greenery. The flowers and trees wither away. But in this desolation, there is still a certain beauty. Wei Yuan countered. Your Majesty, desolation has never been considered scenic. Yuanjing smiled softly. Come spring, the flowers will bloom once more. Wei Yuan challenged him. And when spring comes, how long will it last before this desolation returns? The emperor glanced at him sideways. So, How do you think it should be handled? Wei Yuan replied calmly. The sight of blooming flowers is indeed beautiful, but all beauty fades. When spring ends, winter comes. Your Majesty, observe the evergreen trees. Regardless of the season, spring's breeze or winter's snow, we should clear away the excess flowers and grasses, and leave only the evergreen trees. That is the path to lasting prosperity. Emperor Yuanjing's smile faded, his gaze turning cold. The Qing, though visibly tense, remained composed. He did not take a step back. Yuanjing spoke calmly. The Empress recently caught a cold. Though recovered, her appetite has been poor. She hasn't eaten much for several days. Wei Yuan asked, what do Sixiangwen's alchemists say? Yuanjing shook his head. Although her appetite is lacking, her health is otherwise fine. I notice she's become thinner. Would you visit her on my behalf? The Qing bowed slightly, acknowledging the request. As he turned to leave, Emperor Yuanjing watched him silently, his face expressionless, like a cold, unyielding statue. Wei Yuan made his way through the palace, passing through the checkpoints before entering the hall. The Empress smiled softly. Wei Gong, why are you here? Wei Yuan bowed respectfully. I heard that your Majesty was ill. The Empress smiled faintly. I have already recovered. Wei Yuan conveyed his mission. His Majesty mentioned that your appetite has been poor. Empress's smile faded. Did he send you here? Does Wei Gong not know that I was ill? Wei Yuan's eyes softened for a moment. He shook his head gently. I've been busy with official matters. I was unaware of your illness. The Empress turned her head away, her tone indifferent. I'm tired. Noticing her displeasure, Wei Yuan quickly advised, please drink less tea. It's hard on the stomach. The Empress ignored him, allowing her maids to help her back to her quarters. Wei Yuan stood silently, his heart aching as he exhaled slowly. He bowed deeply. Your servant takes his leave. The Empress suddenly called out, Wei Yuan. Wei Yuan paused but did not turn around. The Empress opened her mouth as if to say something, but hesitated, weighed down by many concerns. In the end, she said nothing. Wei Yuan continued walking without stopping. His cloak fluttered as he left, leaving a melancholic silhouette behind. Wei Yuan truly did not know about the Empress's illness. His informants near the palace had been removed by Emperor Yuanjing recently. The Empress was unaware of this. Thus, she could only let him misunderstand. At this moment, the tall and graceful Princess Huiqing arrived with her maids and guards. Wei Yuan greeted her with a respectful bow. He casually explained, His Majesty heard that the Empress's appetite is poor, and that she was unwell, so he sent me to check on her. Princess Huiqing nodded without further comment. Father hasn't visited the harem in years, she noted. His focus is entirely on seeking immortality. When a concubine falls ill, he usually just sends someone to inquire. Huiqing continued. The palace servant said, Mother hasn't been eating much lately. Wei Yuan frowned. If she remains malnourished after an illness, it could leave lasting health issues. Huiqing smiled faintly, showing no real concern. I was about to summon Su Qian, she said, but since I encountered you here, Wei Gong, there's no need to trouble the palace guards. Wei Yuan looked surprised. What do you mean, Your Highness? Huiqing explained. Su Qian has a special recipe. It enhances the flavor of food immensely. The taste lingers on the palate. Since Mother has no appetite, perhaps we could try his recipe. Wei Yuan fell silent. He muttered to himself, since when did that brat come up with something new again? At Huiqing Tower, Wei Yuan asked directly. I heard you have a secret recipe to enhance the taste of dishes. Su Qian inwardly cursed. Is Huiqing always this nosy? She even spreads trivial things like this everywhere. Su Qian thought with frustration. As he realized this, Su Qian chuckled awkwardly. It's just a minor trick. Nothing special, he said humbly. Not worth troubling Wei Gong. Wei Yuan calmly explained. The Empress has lost her appetite lately and has grown weak. We'd like to try your recipe. Su Qian suddenly understood. The Empress was Huiqing's birth mother, and Huiqing had asked Wei Yuan. Su Qian retrieved a small jade token, tapped the back of it, and a jar the size of a head popped out. He handed it to Wei Yuan. Wei Yuan opened the jar and sniffed it. He frowned immediately. The strong, slightly pungent aroma filled his nostrils. He quickly sealed the jar again. Wei Yuan turned to Su Qian. Go and have the cook prepare a bowl of noodles. A quarter of an hour later, Su Qian returned with a bowl of egg and shredded pork noodles. Placed the bowl on Wei Yuan's desk. Wei Yuan nodded. Take a bite to test for poison. Su Qian was speechless. There was only one pair of chopsticks, so he used the opposite end to take a bite. After a brief wait, Wei Yuan confirmed that the noodles had not poisoned Su Qian. Satisfied, he gestured for Su to step back. Just as Wei Yuan was about to eat, Su Qian casually remarked, the poison could be on the chopsticks, you know. Wei Yuan snapped angrily. Get out. Su Qian didn't budge. After spending so much time with Wei Yuan, he knew the man rarely got truly angry. As expected, Wei Yuan didn't press the issue. Su Qian began eating the noodles himself. The chewy texture surprised him. The intense flavor from the seasoning exploded on his taste buds. When he sipped the broth, Wei Yuan's eyes lit up with delight. Su Qian eagerly asked, "Well, how is it?" Wei Yuan nodded approvingly. Even the most skilled chefs couldn't create such a flavor with years of effort. After finishing the bowl, Wei Yuan took a small vial from his sleeve. Wei Yuan handed the vial to Su Qian. "Pour some of your chicken essence into this bottle." Su Qian took the vial, shaking it like a kitchen auntie at work. Though the movements were exaggerated, very little of the seasoning actually came out. He weighed the 2 vials in his hands and handed the smaller one back to Wei Yuan, expecting him to take it. But Wei Yuan shook his head, refusing. "That one's yours. The one in your right hand is mine." Su Qian froze, momentarily speechless. Meanwhile, in the palace, a maid served a few delicious dishes. The rich aroma filled the room. However, the empress frowned, looking displeased. "I told you, just prepare a simple bowl of congee." One maid timidly replied, "Your Majesty, Wei Gong sent a special recipe and insisted that we make something nourishing." Another maid gently urged, "Please, Your Majesty, just have a taste." Hearing that it was Wei Yuan's suggestion, the empress sighed. Reluctantly, she took a sip of the soup. She frowned slightly as she tasted it, but the intense umami flavor exploded on her palate. Her throat moved involuntarily as she swallowed. She instinctively reached for the bowl, drinking the rest of the broth without hesitation. No more aversion or reluctance, she thought, finishing it all. "I suddenly feel quite hungry." The empress instructed, "Serve rice." The next morning, a eunuch from the empress's palace arrived at the watchman's headquarters, with gifts of gold. He asked excitedly, "Where did Wei Gong get this recipe?" The empress was delighted with her meal last night. Wei Yuan, slightly anxious, asked, "Did she eat a lot?" "No aversion." The eunuch smiled. "More than usual, even more than when she's in good health." He continued, "In fact, she even inquired about lunch this morning." Wei Yuan smiled with genuine relief. Meanwhile, Su Qian was summoned to the palace by Huiqing. She asked with a curious tone, "Today, I had lunch with mother, and the dishes tasted different," Huiqing remarked. "Seems your recipe was modified." Su Qian smiled and replied, "That's all thanks to Senior Brother Song and Miss Kaiwei." Huiqing nodded thoughtfully. "I must say, I miss that taste. But mother is stingy and won't share. Do you have any left?" Su Qian immediately shook his head. "No, I gave Wei Gong the entire jar. It all went to the empress." He silently added, "Actually, I kept a small vial, but that's for Biao Biao. If I give it to Huiqing, there'll be chaos when Biao Biao finds out." Huiqing's delicate brows furrowed. "But I heard the amount Wei Yuan sent to mother was only half a jar." Su Qian froze, astonished. He stared at Huiqing in shock. Huiqing met his gaze with calm eyes, her expression full of suspicion. Su Qian went silent. Did Wei Yuan really skim some off the top? He thought. He couldn't believe Wei Gong would pull such a trick, middlemen profiting on the side. Too much. Still, Su Qian resigned himself to the fact. Judging by everyone's enthusiasm, it was clear that if mass-produced, this seasoning would rake in a fortune. Huiqing sipped her tea, moistening her lips slightly, and spoke in a calm tone. "Recently, there have been sudden tensions in court, escalating political infighting." Su Qian perked up. "It seems Wei Gong and Prime Minister Wang have joined forces. They plan to purge the smaller factions." Huiqing continued. Su Qian's eyes lit up. "That's great news." But Huiqing shook her head. "Father has blocked their efforts. He benefits from a chaotic court. The more intense the infighting, the more he can focus on his Taoist pursuits. If 1 or 2 factions dominate, he risks losing control over the court." Su Qian silently noted. "She trusts me enough to share this, but why does it feel like she's too interested in me? Though I have been charming, but I've barely even flattered you a few times," Su Qian thought. He bowed slightly and said, "Factional struggles are a double-edged sword. They can both secure His Majesty's position and disrupt court stability. The more factions there are, and the fiercer the conflicts, the less anyone will focus on actual governance. All they'll care about is how to use schemes to crush their rivals." Huiqing mused, "Could completely eliminating factionalism be the key to lasting peace?" Su Qian shook his head. "Politics is too complex for that." Huiqing pondered his words deeply. Her eyes suddenly lit up with realization. Su Qian quickly added, "These are just my humble thoughts. I wonder if your highness is interested in hearing more?" Huiqing subtly adjusted her posture and replied calmly, "Please continue." Su Qian hesitated briefly before saying, "His Majesty's approach to managing the court may be flawed. To maintain stability, you don't need countless factions. 3 balanced factions are enough. In any field, the triangle is the most stable structure, though perhaps not in marriage." Huiqing raised a brow at the unfamiliar term. "Triangle?" she asked curiously. Su Qian formed a triangle shape with his hands. Recognition dawned on Huiqing's face. "This structure is common in palace architecture." Su Qian nodded. "If there are only 2 factions, they might form secret alliances. They could pretend to be at odds publicly, but collude in private. However, with 3 competing powers, it's difficult for any 2 to reach an agreement. This keeps the court relatively stable and easier to control." Huiqing fell into deep thought. After a long pause, she seemed to grasp something. She smiled and looked at Su Qian with renewed admiration. The scholars at Yunlu Academy praised you as a promising student, she said. I thought it was just because of your poetry. Who knew you also had such strategic insight? Few scholars in the entire kingdom can match you. Those great scholars truly have a keen eye. It seems I underestimated you. Su Qian chuckled awkwardly. No, not really. They just think my poetry is good. You haven't underestimated me either. I'm just a keyboard warrior, right? A hero in my own words, leading imaginary battles, and pointing out faults with ease, but truly unmatched in real life. Su Qian thought for a moment, then steered the conversation. Besides factional rivalry, there's another deadly issue facing the court. Just as he spoke, he suddenly realized, forgive me, Your Highness. My choice of words was inappropriate. Huiqing smiled gently. No need for such formalities. Here, we speak as trusted companions. Feeling reassured, Su Qian continued, the emperor can easily manipulate high-ranking officials, their appointments and dismissals, but the lower bureaucracy? They've become a significant source of corruption and decay. This has been accumulating for two main reasons. First, the endless factional struggles have led to administrative neglect. They're too busy fighting to govern. Second, His Majesty's obsession with immortality. He's been pursuing it for over 2 decades. This has weakened the court's control over local governance. Huiqing nodded thoughtfully. You and I share the same perspective. I've pondered this issue many times, but haven't found a solution. Su Qian suggested, centralization of power. Huiqing hesitated, repeating slowly, centralized power? Her tone carried curiosity. Su Qian nodded. The emperor currently has too many divided responsibilities. He maintains the chaos of factional infighting by distributing power and privileges, but his authority is spread too thin. Su Qian paused. He hesitated to continue, realizing the sensitivity of the topic. Discussing how to change the current system was bordering on forbidden territory. It would require either the emperor's full return to governance or his abdication. Seeing that Huiqing had fallen silent, Su Qian decided to take his leave. Huiqing princess finally snapped out of her thoughts, but still gave a slight nod, signaling approval. Su Qian, you may leave. Though there was a hint of reluctance in her eyes, Su Qian took his leave and promptly made his way to Linen. Su Qian, you promised. Linen huffed. Weren't you supposed to visit me every day after solving that case? Su Qian gave a sheepish laugh. This palace isn't a place I can just stroll into. Linen pouted for a moment, but then chuckled. I want to leave the palace soon. You'll accompany me, won't you? Su Qian gave her a side eye and refused decisively. Nope. Linen's eyes widened in disbelief. You ungrateful servant. The two resumed their playful bickering. Linen tried to overpower him with her seductive charm, fluttering her alluring peach blossom eyes, while Su Qian countered with his deadpan glare. As usual, Linen was the first to relent, her round, delicate face blushing softly. She turned away and sulked. If it were Huiqing, you'd obey without question, wouldn't you? Su Qian sighed exasperatedly. Huiqing wouldn't ask me to do something so reckless. Look, sneaking a princess out of the palace? That's a death sentence. He reached into his robe and pulled out a porcelain bottle. I came across this recently. It's a seasoning called chicken essence. It enhances flavor. Linen took the bottle curiously. Chicken essence? What a weird name. She then teased him with a sly grin. You're broke again, aren't you? How about this? I'll gift you some calligraphy. Oh, and there's this ivory pen from the treasury. It's supposed to be valuable, but I don't like writing, so I'll just give it to you too. Su Qian immediately feigned righteous indignation. Your Highness misunderstands. I am not here for rewards. I serve willingly, with all my heart. Linen, who adored flattery, beamed with delight. Then what do you want? Su Qian replied earnestly. Could you perhaps convert it to silver? Linen glared, her pout deepening, and playfully resumed her mock standoff with him. Linen's gaze softened, less confrontational, more tender, almost affectionate. All right, she relented. I'll give you silver, but I'm bored out of my mind. Even my pets are no longer entertaining. Tell me a story. Continue that one about Journey to the West. Su Qian immediately agreed. Of course, Your Highness. Let's pick up where we left off, about the magical banana leaf fan. After sipping some tea to moisten his throat, Su Qian began recounting the tale. An hour passed quickly. Su Qian, aware of his afternoon patrol duties, reluctantly prepared to take his leave. Linen, however, was reluctant to part. Su Ningyan, I could have father appoint you to the palace. You could be my personal guard. Su Qian felt exasperated. Being your guard has no future prospects. You really want to work me to death? He sighed and responded. Your Highness, I have ambitions of my own. Besides, I'm just a lowly night watchman. Clearly, Su Qian had no interest in being her personal servant, especially since serving Wei Yuan offered more opportunities. Linen pouted. Everyone else is so boring. They're terrified of speaking. I hate reading, and I'm terrible at arts and music. The palace is stifling. When I was younger, the crown prince would play with me, But now, whenever I visit him, he just frowns and says he's too busy with important matters. Su Qian couldn't help but feel sympathy for her. She truly was a lonely princess, trapped in a gilded cage, despite her luxurious life. After a moment of thought, he suggested, "Why not move back to your residence in the city? It'd be much livelier than staying in the palace." Linen's eyes lit up. "Really? Then you'll come to visit me tomorrow, won't you?" Later that evening, Linen arrived at the Jinsei Palace, just in time for dinner. While the Crown Prince enjoyed a meal prepared by Chun Consort, he casually remarked, "Word around the palace says, Wei Yuan sent a secret recipe to the Empress, and it cured her loss of appetite." Chun Consort chuckled softly. "I heard about this chicken essence thing. They say adding just a bit of it to dishes makes the flavor unforgettable." The Crown Prince caught the longing in her tone. "If you want to try it, mother, you'll have to ask the Empress for some." Chun Consort laughed. And even she didn't get any. Linen pulled out a porcelain jar. "Today, Su Ningyan gave me something called essence." She handed it over. The Crown Prince quickly took it, opened the lid, and sniffed. A sharp, savory aroma hit him. "This must be it," he murmured. "Let's reheat the dishes and add this essence. We'll see how it tastes." Shortly after, a maid returned with the reheated dishes. The Crown Prince eagerly tried a bite. After a few chews, his eyes lit up. Both the consort and Linen tasted it, their faces glowing with delight. "This is amazing," the Crown Prince exclaimed. "Such a small jar. Imagine how much effort the palace chefs usually spend to achieve this flavor." He pondered for a moment, then discreetly slipped the jar into his sleeve. "Hey!" Linen glared at him, grabbing his sleeve tightly. "That's mine." The Crown Prince retorted righteously. "Isn't Su Qian your man? Just ask him for more." Chun Consort chuckled. "You two act like children. Let's leave it with me. That's the fairest solution." Linen sat fuming in her palanquin, clutching what little remained of her prized seasoning. "So Su Ningyan gave me something so valuable? But that tricky man is always so slippery. I'll have to verify this." With that thought, Linen decided to visit Huiqing. Soon, she arrived at Huiqing's residence. Ignoring the guards' protests, she strode confidently inside. In the front hall, she met Huiqing, who raised an elegant eyebrow. "Why are you here?" Linen smirked and responded. Walking in, "I heard Wei Yuan gave the Empress a secret recipe that cured her loss of appetite. Everyone in the palace is talking about it." Linen paused mid-step. With a playful tone, she teased, "Huiqing, sister, do you have any of it?" Huiqing answered calmly, "No." Linen seemed skeptical. "Really? None? I wouldn't lie to you," Huiqing replied, her voice unwavering. Linen giggled. "Good. Now I can rest easy." She pulled out a porcelain bottle, shaking it gleefully. "Too bad I have some." Huiqing's face darkened immediately. Her grip on the book tightened audibly. Linen, seeing Huiqing's reaction, became even more smug. Still, sensing potential danger, she wisely decided to retreat. Wiggling her hips triumphantly, she left. However, at the doorway, she paused. Turning back, she taunted once more. "By the way, I forgot to mention, Su Ningyan gave this to me personally." With that, she darted off, mostly to avoid retaliation. Huiqing's book was nearly deformed from her grip. Her face darkened as she seethed, grinding out the name, Su Ningyan. The next morning, Su Ningyan marched back to the yamen with determination, his stride unrelenting. Song Tingfeng spotted a street vendor selling fresh oranges. "Wait here, I'll buy some," he said. Su Ningyan snapped, "Scram? I'll get them. You wait here." Upon returning to the yamen, he received a summons from Wei Yuan. Ecstatic, he sprinted toward Haoqi Tower. "Father Wei loves me more and more. I just got back from lunch, and he's already called for me." Inside, Wei Yuan scolded him. "You shouldn't drink on duty. Aside from a hint of righteousness, you're full of bad habits, glib-tongued, undisciplined, frequenting brothels. If I were your enemy, I'd have reincarnated by now." Su Qian decided to think of himself as a son, and that mindset made it easier to endure the scolding. "Your subordinate acknowledges his mistakes," he said apologetically. Wei Yuan sighed. "Forget it. Habits are hard to change. If people could easily reform themselves, the world wouldn't be full of so many failures." He took a deep sip of tea and pushed a dossier towards Su Qian. His expression grew serious. "You need to make a trip to Yunjo." Su Qian immediately straightened up, flipping open the dossier. "Recently, the watchman received a confidential report," Wei Yuan explained. "It alleges that Yang Chuanan, the military commander of Yunjo, is secretly colluding with mountain bandits, diverting military supplies to profit from them and bolster his own power." Su Qian's brow furrowed. The Yunjo commander is aligned with the Qi faction. No wonder they suddenly escalated their efforts to undermine the watchman. "If it weren't for my dumb luck, they might have succeeded," he thought, realizing how close the call had been. "Father Wei really plays hardball though." By the way, he recalled, Number 2 mentioned that the reason Yunjo's bandits are so resilient is that they have superior terrain and weapons. Someone's backing them with resources. Wei Yuan nodded. Exactly. The Qi faction, being in the capital, needs a local collaborator. After the report reached us, the informant mysteriously died. No one heard a thing, and the evidence vanished. Su Qian's expression grew grave. Wei Yuan continued. The informant was actually a former adjutant under the commander. I've reported this to the emperor. He'll be sending an inspector general from the censorate to investigate. Your job is to protect the inspector and gather solid evidence. Su Qian hesitated. Why me? Why must I go to Yunjo? Wei Yuan calmly replied. Zhang Luzong will take charge of this mission. You'll accompany him to gain experience. Su Qian immediately felt relieved. One more thing, Wei Yuan added. Don't use too much of that chicken essence. It can make people overly thirsty. Tell the cooks to go easy on it. Su Qian thought to himself, I'm just too kind. He just berated me, but here I am, giving him a helpful reminder without any resentment. Wei Yuan didn't reply. Instead, he pointed toward the door. Su Qian hadn't processed it yet. When Wei Yuan shouted, get out, Su Qian promptly scurried away. Knowing he'd be leaving for Yunjo the next day, he immediately left the yamen to pack his belongings. His sister, Su Lingyue, looked worried, her face filled with concern. She realized that she wouldn't see her beloved older brother for a while. Even his sharp-tongued aunt showed concern. I heard Yunjo is humid and damp, she said, with constant rain. You need to be careful not to get sick. Take some herbal ointment with you. As she spoke, she suddenly smacked the table. Su Ningyan, are you listening to me? Su Qian sighed, feeling exasperated. I got it. You don't need to nag. I'm just here to check in, alright? He muttered under his breath. Su Qian thought about how, in his past life, he was used to the damp climate of southern China. Enduring the wetness wasn't a problem. He relied on sheer resilience. Later that evening, he visited Jiafengxi one last time. Propping himself up with his arms, he gazed at the blushing beauty beneath him. Tomorrow, I'll be leaving for Yunjo, he said softly. It might take 10 days or more. Hearing this, Fu Xiang immediately tensed, her long, pale legs tightening around his waist. I heard the bandits in Yunjo are rampant. It's dangerous there, she said worriedly. Su Qian chuckled. Even if it's dangerous, it's still under the Empire's control. No need to worry about anything. The two apologized to each other. The crackling sound echoed again. Leaving Jiaofengxi, Su Qian then visited Guanxinglong. He informed Chu Kaiwei about his trip to Yunjo. Wang Kun and others were amazed after hearing it. They expressed interest in learning too. But due to ongoing improvements in refining their elixirs, and needing further promotion afterward, he needed to seize the opportunity to advance to the 6th rank. Thus, he couldn't leave the capital. Su Qian, for personal reasons, wanted to travel. He thought of taking Chu Kaiwei with him as a vacation. Many couples with ambiguous relationships travel together and end up falling for each other. Sometimes, they even end up having children. Since he couldn't take Chu Kaiwei along, Su Qian took the refined elixir he'd worked hard for. A charming, egg-faced beauty named Huang Kun chased him angrily out of Guanxing Tower. She shouted at Su Qian's fleeing figure, calling him a scoundrel at the top of her lungs. You're a jerk. Next, he sought an audience with Princess Huijing at the palace. However, the guards returned with her reply. The princess doesn't want to see you. Please leave, the guard added, leaving Su Qian puzzled. She doesn't want to see me? But we had a good conversation yesterday. Everything I did yesterday should have made her value me more. Rejected coldly by the elder princess, Su Qian turned to find her younger sister, a rounded, enchanting beauty. Upon hearing that Su Qian had come to visit, she was delighted. She sat in the pavilion, smiling warmly. Being out of the palace is indeed freeing, she said with a smile, but it's quite boring here. Maybe I should live in the palace again. Su Qian replied, I'm leaving tomorrow for Mingzhou. I won't be back for a while. Since we had an appointment tomorrow, I came to say goodbye. Lin An's face fell instantly. Looking disappointed, she said, then my plans with the princess were for nothing. Her mother only allowed her to stay out for 3 days, but she had secretly hoped for more, thinking that this little copper gong might take him to play in the inner city. Su Qian had just taken a few steps outside. He couldn't help but turn around for another look. He saw Lin An sitting in the pavilion, with the desolate garden as the backdrop. She wore a fiery red dress, looking enchanting and beautiful, yet lonely and desolate. Su Qian sighed internally, feeling annoyed. He turned around and walked back again.